Ready to go? Good. Welcome everybody to the June 24th, 2015 Sherborn Board of Selectmen meeting, and I'll ask if Dave Williams, our town administrator, can please read through the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, we'll vote to approve or amend the agenda and add topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance, and I'm not aware of any of those issues. Then a period of public comment, and then a discussion regarding employee health insurance options, and then an update and consideration of charge amendment for the Public Safety Committee, then a general chemical discussion, then a discussion of fiscal year 2016 town council contract, and then a one-day liquor license application, and then we'll look at appointments and have reports from administrator, the selectmen, and set the next meeting dates.
Okay. Any amendments to that agenda? Do we want to make a motion to accept the agenda?
Move.
Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, great. And next we have public comment, and first on our list is Chief Morrissey from the fire department. Is he here?
I think he got tied up on a ambulance call.
Okay, all right. So we're going to skip him, and next we have Mr. Dowse with the Aqueduct Trail.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
On May 27th, the Planning Board held a public meeting to discuss the proposed trail on the Sudbury Aqueduct. There was a very large turnout. This room was full with standing room only. 98% of the people in the room spoke against the proposal. We kind of felt that the message was carried across. Since then, I've received a copy of an email by one planning board member to Mary Ann Conley of the Mass Water Authority, who's overseeing this project. And it was very bothering to me that he made comments such as that these people were selfish, and some other comments. I'm requesting the Board of Selectmen, because I know you can't discuss this at this time, but I'm requesting the Board of Selectmen to conduct their own open meeting to discuss this so the neighbors can come before this board and view their concerns and show that this will not happen. The Sudbury Aqueduct runs from Sunshine Farm, south side of Framingham, across Coolidge Street, 27 down by Yellow Farms, and into Natick. When it hits Natick, it disappears because it goes into the hill. So I felt at that time that it just didn't make sense. It didn't connect anything. It also goes through two working farms, being Sunshine Farm, Columbia Farms, and also through the middle of the golf course. And these were all concerns, and I felt that this letter sent after that May 27th meeting was showing us that they weren't kind of listening to that group. So as I said, I request the Board of Selectmen to schedule a public meeting so those residents can come in and voice their concerns directly to this board. Thank you.
Thanks, John. David, if you have a copy of that message he refers to?
No, I don't.
John, maybe you can forward that around later to us.
That's right. I have a copy right here. So.
Okay. Well, we won't read it, but it would be helpful just to have everybody see it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Great. Okay. I saw Chief Morrissey show up. Elliot, you had a comment?
I just wanted to comment on his comments. I was at that meeting, and I think it made it very clear that this trail doesn't go anywhere, and it's just being a nuisance to the neighbors. And as you know, I'm a grouch, and
I've never heard that.
But you were the only one that stood up and supported it.
I wouldn't wish it on anyone. There's no sense to it, and I think the planning board owes someone a letter of apology.
Okay, well, so if we have a hearing on that, then you can make those thoughts known at that hearing. Chief Morrissey.
I'll be brief. We all know what a fun winter we had, and due to the declaration that we've discussed, in the way of getting FEMA money, when the area was declared a disaster, part of the FEMA funds is hazardous mitigation. grants become available. And this is to the whole state. So I went to a meeting over at MEMA a couple weeks ago to look into, how it may apply for us. Unfortunately, we do not have a FEMA plan in place. Planning and zoning and conservation, with good faith effort a few years ago, we're going to try to do it in-house and everything and work with MAPC to get that rolling, and it just never came to fruition. So fortunately, we can create this plan with the help of MAPC and with the help of FEMA. They'll pay 75% of the work to be done. Total cost about $16,000, and the town will come up with $4,000. It'll be a 24 to 36 month process. The nice thing is I've been in contact with MAPC. They had a boilerplate scope of work project, the whole 9 yards. I met with MEMA rep this morning. It only took us about 20 minutes to go through the whole thing because I'll be able to more or less click and paste this and put it here, fill in some blanks with some numbers and everything. I hope to have that out before the end of July. Doesn't have to, there's a first round in August that they'd like to get them in for, and then in November. This is pretty basic, but again, once we have this plan in place, it's good for 5 years. And every 5 years it has to be renewed, updated as necessary. But with, the way the weather's been, and we all know that every couple of years there's a pretty big storm that ends up making somewhere in the Commonwealth a declared FEMA or federal disaster area. Chances are that these monies will come around again fairly soon. We'll be able to identify areas in the town with CM&D, conservation, et cetera, and have something in place so next time it rolls around, we'll be able to jump right on that and hopefully be able to get a project going.
Okay, great. Thanks for that info. Okay, and we have Mr. Rissman discussing dog leash law.
Yes, I'll be brief. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to comment on a topic that I think is probably less popular with most people, but I wanted to communicate the issues and the difficulties that my wife and I have been having. Let me start by saying we've resided in Sherborn for about 20 years. We've raised our children here. The issue that I've been struggling with, and it's a recurring one, is on several occasions, somewhere between maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 times, there have been incidents where neighbors' dogs that were unrestrained, not on a leash, unaccompanied by the owner, have not only come onto our property, but they have made aggressive, threatening approaches to us, which in a few instances these dogs have attempted to bite me. They've recently, this month, we've had dog incidents where a dog has confronted my wife and I when the garage was open. We were each getting in and out of our car. The dog came into the garage and confronted us and was growling, and frankly, we don't know what to do. We were afraid to get out of our car. We were afraid to go into our car. This particular dog was on numerous occasions this month running around my house, barking very loudly, behaving in a very odd way. One day, went up on our backyard deck for at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. In fact, it did it several times during that particular week. But this particular dog sat on the deck barking and growling. I was on the phone with a client. I'm an attorney. This went on, and I had to go into the basement to basically escape the noise. I couldn't get the dog to leave. The dog was facing me, growling at me through the sliding glass door. The problems that I'm talking about here, I don't know how to manage it. I'm in fear of serious bodily injury, as well as my wife and guests, and we have a 4-year-old granddaughter that comes to my house and plays in the yard and in the driveway. We have 2 friends that Only a few weeks ago, their 2-year-old was attacked viciously by a dog, severely injured, 16 stitches, and disfigured. This may not seem like a big problem to people here. Maybe people don't have the bad luck we've had, but I will tell you, starting in 2006, and we had incidents before that. 2006, my wife was riding her bicycle down our street, only a few houses from where I live on Oldfield Drive. She was attacked by a dog that was growling, very aggressive. It was trying to bite her legs. It eventually caused her bike to flip end over end, and my wife was, well, she nearly died. She may look fine now, but let me tell you, she was in the hospital for quite a long time. Broken bones to the face, to the arms, to the legs, lacerations, plastic surgery, many months of physical rehab with residuals now. That particular dog, much like these other dogs that I'm telling you about, that dog was unregistered. It was unattended by its owner, not on a leash. That particular dog, in all these instances, we started with the police department. They're very responsive. I don't have any question or problems with them. They take my call. They put me through typically to the animal control unit. His name is Joe Shepard. Every time since 2006, it's been the same problem. They put me through to his voicemail because he's not there. Days and days go by before he gets back to me. Of course, the dog is long gone. I give him a description of the dog. Invariably, in almost every case, except the first case in 2006, he will tell me, I know about that dog, I know the owners, it's been a problem. Invariably, he'll say it's been a problem. This dog in 2006, Mr. Shepard, and this is also the problem with Mr. Shepard and I don't get meaningful support from him. He will never tell me who the owner is, so my wife and I can talk to the owners. Never, not once. He will never tell me, as in this case, whether the dog that attacked my wife had a rabies vaccination. We had no records. This town had no record of that dog or its vaccinations. I had to hire a private detective because I couldn't get adequate support from Mr. Shepard to solve whether or not, while my wife's in the hospital, she needs to undergo rabies shots. So I understand that the police can't do much, and maybe arguably neither can the animal control officer, if there are no specific dog control measures in place. I'm not sure what the alternatives would be, but it seems to me that the majority of the people who come by my house with their dog, who have their dog on a leash, that seems a reasonable way to handle the situation, and I'm not particularly worried about it. But again, this month, like many months, if I describe to you in more detail, which I really don't want to get into, but this dog caused problems that I won't get into when it came this month. I'm looking for a balance. You know, I can't be armed with a weapon, knowing whether or not the next dog that comes at me is going to be friendly or aggressive. I don't want to wait until I have yet another series of injuries. We had to, this particular neighbor in 2006, of course, denied that it was her dog, snuck down during a lunch a few days later to get the dog registered, first in someone else's name, so it wouldn't be her problem. Less than 24 hours, she came back and she re-registered in her name so she'd have homeowner's insurance. Then she engaged in spoliation to dispose of the particular red leash, the particular red collar that my wife had described to the policeman. I mean, this is the kind of problem that, unfortunately, you come to when owners are irresponsible, and in a community where we have no leash law. Mr. Shepard told me, and it's a quote, he doesn't know of any other city or town in the entire New England area that doesn't have either. Now, I don't know what it means to impose animal control. He talked about animal control as an alternative. This dog that attacked my wife had reported history. There were other incidents that had been reported. I'm told as many as 6 or 7, maybe even 9. This particular dog, Mr. Shepherd had an opportunity to deal with. And it was obviously ineffective because my wife was yet another victim. This time, though, it nearly killed my wife. She was bleeding to death, unconscious, in the street. And the only reason she survived is because the Sherborn police were patrolling the neighborhood and they found her just before it was too late. The dog was seen by Mr. Shepherd repeatedly over these events that were reported and seen to be not dangerous. But it was never caused to be registered. The dog, even after it attacked my wife, when he went to the home, and I don't know how you assess these things, even after my wife was nearly killed, and we had evidence, including the private detective, with photographs showing this dog baring its teeth, ears down, extremely aggressive, lunging at him. Mr. Shepherd formally determined that the dog was not dangerous. So after my family's incident, which took us 2 years to recover from, including a lawsuit, the dog was never forced to be euthanized. It was never forced to be kept in a restrained area in a cage on their property. There was never any requirement that it be kept on a leash. What we're talking about here, I'll call it the double whammy. We have no affirmative measures to manage and mitigate the risk with a simple dog leash, which the majority of people are using. Number 2, we have an animal control officer who is in part handicapped because there are no rules that they can really work with much. But when he has opportunities like this to deal with an aggressive dog, he doesn't even classify the dog as dangerous. And again, I've had many discussions with Mr. Shepherd. He will never tell me who owns the dog. He will not even tell me that he's gone to the owners and come back and tell my wife and I he's addressed the issue and it shouldn't recur. He just goes off into oblivion, and this problem that I'm living with has reached the point where my wife and I, we've given up riding a bicycle in the neighborhood for 10 years. We won't walk alone in the neighborhood at night. This may sound paranoid to you, but based on my experiences, I have to tell you, I have several choices here. I can either say nothing and do nothing like I did since 2006 when I should have taken action. I could have named the town and the animal control officer as the defendant in the case. We won that case. Or I could have come to this group and maybe an annual meeting and pressed this issue for some kind of leash law. That's what I could have done. Or I could try to arm myself with a weapon, which is exceptionally, it's excessive. Why should I have to be armed with mace or a gun or whatever it takes? If that dog attacks me, what do I do? What do I do when my 4-year-old's playing and the dog comes after her like they did our friends, the 2-year-old, who's disfigured now? Or I could simply take the last resort. I could sell my house and we could move. Now, I've thought about taking this to the media, but I'd rather start with the community governing structure. I think it's, as many of you probably know, Massachusetts is one of a dozen states or more that have strict liability. So any damage that's caused to person or property by a dog transfers to the owner. That's another issue. That leaves this city, this town, exposed to liabilities that I'm not sure we should be exposed to. And that's really all I have to say. I'm going to try to get a citizen's petition in the works. Mr. Williams and Ms. Moores were kind enough to meet with me yesterday and help me start this process. But I would urge that you discuss it, and I can certainly give you contact information if anybody wants to talk to me at some point later. But I'm trying my best to find a balance. I can't continue like this. This is just, I no longer have the full and complete benefit of peaceful possession of my property. I can't even go in my yard anymore. It shouldn't be that way.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
you list all these alternatives, but there's another alternative. The Board of Selectmen has the power to issue orders that would restrain a dog, require it to be leashed, require special containment, and even ultimately to have a dog put down. And that involves you filing a complaint with this board, and then it's investigated, and then there's a hearing. And during the time that I've been on this board, this board has ordered measures taken against specific dogs. All this trouble that's gone your way over these years, none of it was ever reported to the board so that we could take action. And I would suggest that you, if you're having a problem with a dog going into your garage, that you immediately file a complaint with the town administrator.
Well, I now know who the owner is, so I will do that fairly promptly. It's interesting to me that we just saw the owner walking that dog on a tight leash as we came over here. You know, the problem is, though, sir, that is after the fact. You know, my wife was nearly killed. And, you know, by the way, Mr. Shepherd, who I've had many interactions with over the last 9 years, he's never suggested any of this. I mean, the problem I have is he's, in my opinion, ineffective. And I think, you know, there needs to be a study done. Somebody needs to evaluate whether he's the right person to discharge, you know, this role. But I will gladly file a complaint. I now know who the owner is, and believe me, my wife and I, when it reaches the point where it's coming in your house and you can't get out of your car, and it sits on your deck, and I will tell you the rest of it. It urinates and defecates all over my deck.
Mr. Eastman, we've heard a lot of this, and unfortunately, because this is public comment period, we have a full agenda tonight.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I do appreciate your coming in. We'll take this up another meeting, and you'll be notified when that happens. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Let's move on to the employee health insurance discussion, please.
I just want to give a preface that it's probably a year ago or more that the selectmen had off and on an advisory committee mentioned about what savings might happen if the town were to move to GIC. That's the Group Insurance Commission. There's a whole process involved in that, plus you have to have some sort of analysis done to see whether you're going to actually save money. And at that time, I think it was about 6 or 7 months ago, the Board of Selectmen authorized us to go out and hire a consultant who specialized in that kind of analysis. And so we have tonight is Peter Savage, and he's been meeting with Irene diligently about coming up with options and the presentation for the board. So that's where we're at.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Paul. Mr. Durancis.
Because of the way this agenda item is stated, I'm going to have to generally recuse myself. That's because the agenda item is looking to discuss different options available to the town. One of those options is a reference to Maya, and I sit on the board of directors of the parent company to Maya, and therefore, because that's included in the discussion, I can't participate. But had this been divided up, for example, the business about using the new statute to change co-pays and things like that, I was part of the team that got that enacted, and I'm quite familiar with it and how it can operate. But because it's intermingled this way, I can't participate in part. So I'm taking the time to explain that, so hopefully in the future agenda items might break this item down a little bit so that I can participate in the parts that I can participate in and not have to recuse myself from the totality of it.
That's fine. I'm sure we'll have plenty of more discussions, but thanks for the explanation. Good. I guess Mr. Savage, you're up, I guess.
Thank you very much. I don't think that we're really going to be getting into recommending any specific action with any type of coverage tonight. I think what I want to do is sort of pick up where the insurance overview that Irene did last month, I believe, and get a little bit more specific about the options that are open to you and what I think you probably should seriously consider now as a step in the right direction.
Before you start, can I just ask, I know you were brought in as our consultant, so you've had a chance to study our track record, what we've been doing and what it's cost, and think about potential options. Is that the idea?
A little bit. Basically what we've done thus far, as the specifics on that goes, we've taken a look at what your current option is, what that cost is, what the cost would have been had you elected to use the other option available to you under the West Suburban Health Group, which is basically what's referred to as a benchmark plan. It's similar to the current GIC level of benefits. Also, I've looked at what would happen if you went to the new GIC level of benefits, and also looking at the GIC itself. I'll say right up front that every one of the options that you have have some advantages, some disadvantages. There's no magic to this. I think particularly if you've been involved in it, if we found that magic bullet, we'd probably be talking to you from Bermuda or some other nice place right now. But there isn't a simple answer.
This is a nice place.
This is.
Going to records.
This is actually second to Bermuda. This is one of my favorite places.
A lot of offshore captives here in Sherborn.
I think as I said, the presentation that was done before gave a good overview of what's happening. I don't think there's any surprise to anybody that the healthcare costs, are increasing dramatically. One of the things we're finding now is that even though there are attempts to modify plan design and do that sort of thing, there are a tremendous number of really dynamic new drugs that are about to come on the marketplace or into the marketplace. They're extremely expensive. It's going to help. It's going to continue a lot of this pressure to have the costs go up. The Affordable Care Act, with all due respect to what its intentions are, certainly hasn't thus far lowered costs. If anything, it's increased the responsibility by requiring a lot of additional people to be covered, particularly dependents to 26. It's great that people are getting coverage, but whenever you have more and more people covered under programs, it's more expensive. In addition to that, you have the Affordable Care Act is adding a lot of taxes, fees, and requirements. One of the things you have coming up is that there's a requirement for a form to be filled out for every employer with more than 100 employees in the country is going to have a form filled out similar to a W-2. It's going to have to be given to every employee by the end of January, and then it's going to have to be reported to the IRS somewhat later, certainly by the end of March. And that's all, again, to make sure that you have all the coverage. But it's going to be a lot of work for employers. Where are we on here? We're still... So as I think I started with, people are seeking a magic bullet. I don't think there is one. Part of the problem, I think, when people look at healthcare is the assumption is that there's some way to just drive the cost down. There are ways to influence the cost, certainly, and there are ways to fund it, there are ways to design your plans. But with the major costs in there, the high costs, if somebody's going to get sick, they're going to get sick regardless of what plan they are. Just they're going to have an accident regardless of what plan. As much as we'd like to believe that some providers have much better negotiated rates or some carriers with providers, with hospitals and doctors, the difference among the major carriers is not really that great. You'd find that they're all Blue Cross, Harvard Pilgrim, Tufts, Fallon, all have very similar negotiated rates with the various providers. So the only impact I can really see that you find in Massachusetts, and where you're getting, you could get a little bit of that advantage in the GIC, is that you do have eastern Massachusetts, particularly 128 and in towards Boston, is substantially more expensive than outside 495, for instance. Between the two, it sort of seems to be a wash when it comes to the GIC. So the large claims aren't really something that I think you can control, but I think it is very important, and part of what's happened with a lot of this legislation and a lot of the plan design changes everybody's talking about is to try to get change to the large number of smaller claims that are out there. Even though each individual claim isn't that dramatically large, there are so many of them, it does drive a lot of the cost. So if you can get people through plan design change and things to make decisions towards less expensive venues or alternatives, calling a nurse hotline rather than going to the emergency room, any of these things, every time you can do that, you save a lot of money. In your case, you're in a semi-premium based arrangement, so you don't see it as directly, but you ultimately do see the improvement on that. So what can you really do right now? How can you control the costs? Well, I got through the part about encouraging people to, which I think is the next slide. You talk about...
It's just taking a minute, I'm sorry. It's just taking a minute.
Plan design change. You can do that, and that's what's happened in a lot. That's really the difference between the two plans that you have eligible to you right now with the West Suburban Healthcare, either the rate saver that you're currently using, or they have what they call a benchmark plan. It's referred to that simply because it's benchmarked against the GIC most popular plan in design. That really is adding, a lot of people just refer to it as cost shifting by having deductibles and some higher copays. And part of it is, I'm not going to question that it's asking people to pay a little bit more, but there are options in some of the cases there where you can make a conscious choice to go to a less expensive hospital so your deduction will be less. But more importantly than the person's deduction being less, the cost to the plan is dramatically less. Mass General Hospital versus a local hospital, there's a big difference on what's being charged on the program. So the design on copay and deductible changes, particularly tiered things, is to encourage movement towards less expensive venues more than anything else. Wellness programs and incentives to become fit, these make sense. Whether or not they're going to make a dramatic difference on your cost, they should be done regardless of what you do. Those are very much dependent on people in the account being actively involved in trying to get people involved in the program, coming up with incentives, doing fitness programs, smoking cessation, whatever, with incentives and that sort of thing. They're great. It's very hard to judge what they produce because you're trying to prove a negative on that sort of thing, and it's very hard to see. But if you have a community where people in the management of the community, in a lot of cases it would be school nurses, that sort of thing, they'll get very involved in this sort of thing and stay on top of it and keep people going in the program. It's something that needs to be done. Again, it's not a silver bullet, but it's or a magic bullet, but it's going to help. How you pay for it? The most cost-effective way to pay for a plan is self-funding, but there's increased risk. To be very honest, Sherborn is not big enough to be on its own self-funded. It's a nice option, but you really should be in the 300 to 500 life case to even consider self-funding. Beyond that, it's just not really feasible. You go to the next one. What you currently have is, you can go to premium. Premium is the most expensive way to do it in most cases, but it's more predictable. Because of your size, you would probably not get much advantage to your own experience. You'd most likely be rated in a community-rated setting where you'd be coupled with or joined with all the other communities of your size, and then they sort of bulk rate the whole thing. That tends to make it a little bit more expensive. But since the carrier holds the risk, he charges more, but from your standpoint, it's a more predictable number. That's all you're going to pay that year. Joint purchase, which you currently have, is a blend, really, of those two. West Suburban was the first one to go into this effort. They started this, 15, 18 years ago now, and I think overall it's been a pretty successful program. But it seems to, like a lot of the other joint purchases that have had had built up pretty substantial trust fund balances, used that to supplement their costs. A lot of, they've caught up now over the last couple of years. You don't have the extra money in there to supplement rates. And now we're finding, for instance, with West Suburban, and I think this past year 4 of the groups left the group, which makes it smaller and smaller. It also means when people leave any group like that, the trust owns their run-out liability, and you're not getting any income from them, so it tends to put a real downward pressure on the finances of that group. I'm not suggesting that West Suburban is about to fall apart. I'm saying but it is having pressure on it right now on the costs.
Do you happen to know what those members, what they moved to?
I know at least 2 of them went to the GIC. One went to Maya, and I'm not sure on the 4th one.
Could you explain what you mean by run-on liability? If somebody left West Suburban and they had a patient who's got ongoing oncology treatment, I would assume the new plan would pick up that cost going forward.
Well, if it's incurred after that date, I'm suggesting that your claims lag behind your premium date. So the claims that you'll receive in, let's say it's July 1st, July and August, most of those claims actually been incurred prior to July 1st.
So that'll apply to any switch from one plan to another.
It's an advantage the other way. If you're growing, you get the influx. That's part of actually what happened to the GIC. They got a lot of municipalities joining. It helped them, and now it seems to have caught up there. I'm trying not to be too pessimistic tonight on this whole thing. But, so anyway, I don't think that's really an option. The GIC is obviously an extremely large group. I think total covered people, they're somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 people. One of their big advantages, and they actually do a lot of things well. They do a lot of their own negotiating with carriers. They do a lot of this sort of thing. They're very detailed on enrollments. They run a pretty tight ship in there. One of their biggest advantages, however, is about 1/3 of their population is outside 495, central western Mass, where it's a little less expensive. Anybody in the GIC gets the benefit of those lower costs lumped in with the rest. The vast majority of communities, other than Springfield and 1 or 2 others, Pittsfield, which I think is now coming out of the GIC, were groups in eastern Mass where you had the biggest change. These people were using the Boston hospitals, which we all know may be the best in the world. They're also some of the most expensive. So the bulk of the people came in there. The cost is a little lower, which is an advantage. A disadvantage is you really don't have much control over what your plans are, when they change, or the rates. The one other thing that concerns us a little is this past year anyway, GIC has been running a deficit. You hear a lot that they're just saying, well, the state didn't allocate enough money for their funding, so that their additional people came in, and they had to absorb that until there was a supplemental fund. The only disagreement I have with that is a lot of the increased people in there were municipalities, and municipalities are paying the full boat. So it's, they're paying the 100% of the premium, regardless of how it's divided up locally, 100% of whatever the premium comes in there. I got to catch up to you. Maya, I did, I mentioned in here, and I'm not making this as any of this as a recommendation. I'm saying these things are options that are available. Maya, the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association, part of Mass Municipal, years ago got into the workers' compensation business, particularly when a lot of private carriers wouldn't offer coverage to municipalities. They've also gone into healthcare as of now, I think about 15 years ago or so, and it's a large self-funded group. It was aimed, I think, particularly at smaller groups to help them have the advantage of bigger groups. They have gotten some larger groups going in. I don't think it serves their purposes particularly well, but they went in for a variety of reasons, like getting rid of Master Medical or one of these things. But anyway, they're in there, and I think they are limited to Blue Cross products right now. And again, you do lose a little bit of the control over rating and but you do have choice of plan designs, not unlike what you have in West Suburban. You can pick different levels. They have more choice, I think, than West Suburban. Again, that's...
How many patient lives in MIAA? How many patients covered by MIAA or MIIA?
Is who covered? I'm sorry.
How many patients?
Oh, in Maya, they have over 100 small municipalities and municipal entities in the group. I don't know the actual number of coverage, but it's substantial. It's I would. Do you know? Oh, okay. So I think it's a substantial number, which has helped steady their rates out there. Although the last couple of years we have seen rates start to creep up there as well. The other is looking at other joint purchase groups, which is an option, although some of these I've mentioned up here, I don't think just regionally. Mayflower, Cape Cod, I don't really think those would, or Berkshire certainly would you'd be a candidate for, but Minuteman, Neshoba is a possibility, maybe Hampshire County. You'd have to take a look at that. The downside on joining another joint purchase group is usually when you try to get in there, you have to pay an upfront fee per person to sort of supplement their any reserves that they have, and that can sort of offset certainly initial savings and could hurt more down the road. Maya, however, if you did consider that, you don't have that kind of a buy-in on that problem, so something worth looking at. Okay. So what are your options, I think, right now? I think I've mentioned a lot of things that are certainly worth looking at, and part of that is you're going to have to get more details on what your actual experience has been, claims experience over the last few years. What we looked at initially was just saying if you remain, currently your budget is, I think I have the numbers somewhere here.
1.8 million?
It's about almost $1.9 million for this year, I believe. If you join if you move to the benchmark plans, and actually that's not the accurate number on there, if you move to just the benchmark plans that are currently available, which are a reflection of the GIC's current plans, not the ones that are taking effect July 1st, you would save about $42,000. If you move to the new benchmark, which is not yet available through West Suburban, but that would have just about doubled that, actually a little more than doubled it, to about $86,000.
Could you briefly describe the difference between the existing benchmark and the new benchmark?
Yeah. What's happened is basically it's based on what the GIC has done with their plan designs. The whole benchmark idea is that it is if you want to, you can change your plans through legislation available from 30 through 32B, but you can't change the benefits to be any more stringent than the GIC's most popular plan. GIC's plans fundamentally are all the same benefit design. It's just how you have access to them, what their networks are like, where they're located geographically, but the plan design is pretty similar. The biggest differences on those plans are that they currently have a deductible up front of $250 and $750, $700. Actually, I think I did a little diagram on the changes. Which I can, I'll actually can give this to you. And this would just highlight the major differences in the plans. Oh, sorry.
So is the current benchmark still going to exist after July 1st?
Well, as far as GIC goes, no, not really. The new plan will be in place, but West Suburban has not, their benchmark, they have not yet adopted the new levels, and they're considering that for July 1st, 2016. So if you look at the major differences on here, currently under your rate saver plan, you don't have any upfront deductible. If you just go across that top section, the current benchmark is a $250 individual and a 750 maximum family. Just to be clear in there, if you're a two-person family, it's 500 because it's obviously cuts off at 250 per individual. The new benchmark, as of July 1st, it's going to 300 and 900 for the GIC. No real change on primary care visits. Preventative services are still covered completely. Specialist visits, however, $35 is what your current plan is. That's also the specialist number in the current benchmark, but it's a tiered one, whether or not the plan you joined is capable of tiering it, but the new GIC plan is $30 for Tier 1, $60 for Tier 2, and $90 for Tier 3. Again, those are aimed at trying to encourage people to go to more cost-effective providers. Emergency room stays the same. In-hospital changes pretty dramatically. That you're currently at $250 for a copay on a hospital. The current benchmark would be $300 without any, without exhausting your deductible. For Tier 1 hospitals, $300 after your deductible for Tier 2, and $700 for the most expensive plans, and that would be after your deductible, and that's the Mass General and that sort of thing, the known more expensive. If you look at the new benchmark, that's $250, $500, and $1,500 for those more expensive hospitals. Ambulatory outpatient surgery, you're currently $125, current benchmark $150, new one is $250. High-tech imaging, I don't think you have any upfront deductible now. The benchmark is $100 and stays that after deductible. And prescriptions, again, there's a pretty good change. It's $10, $25, $45 now for retail, $20, $50, $90 for mail order. It would go to $10, $25, $50, not much of a change, $20, $50, and then $110 for the Tier 3. The new one is $10, $30, $65, $25, $75, $65. Those are the major differences on the plans. The idea on this thing, and again, it's sort of it's a balance you have to try to maintain. You want to encourage people to make smart decisions, fiscally prudent decisions, but you don't want to set it up to the point that you're having people not seek care, so that something that is relatively minor and might be caught could blossom into something more serious if they didn't go. There is a lot of push to try to get people now, and I forget myself on it. Every plan out there has a nurse, either nurse practitioner or a nurse line that you can call on the weekend or at night, and they can generally give you some very good information, and if you need to go to the emergency room, they're going to tell you. But rather than just, I don't know why kids only seem to get sick at night or on weekends, but that's the way it seems to be, and people run off to the emergency room. Well, it's 4 times the expense, as we all know. So again, it's trying to push those kinds of things. So we looked at the various savings. The last one here would be if you move to the GIC. And that's on the next page, I think. It's taking its time. Okay.
How many people in our plan?
In your plan? I'm trying to remember the total number. Do you remember offhand?
I don't have it with me offhand.
I don't have the total number. I have the...
David, how many?
I thought it was 220, but it's 150 to 220.
We could add them up. I'd have to total them. You're in the 120 range for active, and
about 40 retired.
about 45 people. I actually have it in the folder here, if you need to know. That's not the folder.
Okay, we can do that later.
I can get you that number, but we do have it here. It is 33 individuals, 60 families, so it's about 90 in the actives. No, that's just that portion of it. Yeah, no, that's right, 33 and 60, and then in your retirees, there are 53. So I leapt ahead there.
Move to GIC.
Okay. So what we have in here now is just looking at the savings. If you went to the GIC, and that would be on the new GIC plan, the town budget would save about 127,000 employees. $73,000, be a total reduced cost of about $200,000. Again, I mentioned some of the advantages and disadvantages of it, but off the top, just financially, you would save some money. Sure.
When you're talking employee savings, does that take into account the extra deductibles they're going to pay on average?
No, that's just looking at their premium savings on this thing. It's hard to judge what, who's going to spend that additional money on there. There would be additional costs.
Well, everyone's going to spend the deductible.
Most people are, right. And again, as I said, I think a little earlier, to get a lot of the really accurate numbers on some of these things, like going and seeking premium, quotes directly from a variety of carriers, we have to get some more details on your past couple of years' claims experience, enrollments, et cetera. So hopefully, that gives you an idea of some of the kinds of things that I think are open to you. What I think you should do now, which is catching up to me here, we talked a little bit, and I guess you're all aware of that, sections 21 through 23 of Mass General Law, Chapter 32B. The history of that is simply that the state has been very critical of municipalities over the last 10 or 15 years as to how municipalities have not modified their plans to stay a little bit more current with what's happening in the private sector, and certainly that it's fallen behind what's happened in the state programs. The fact is, though, that the state has abilities to change their plans and their rating, which you don't have. Under your current arrangements, under 150E negotiating, in order for you to make a change in your plan, you've got to get an agreement from all of your bargaining units, and they've all got to agree on the same thing before you can implement any change. Recognizing that, the state reluctantly eventually passed these changes. The changes that are in place, the legislation was submitted for 7 or 8 years in a row, and it never made it out of committee. But finally, they realized that communities needed some legislative ability out there, or some negotiating ability to try to get things done. So the changes came in 2011, and that was with the addition of sections 21 through 23. I noticed that you have some copies of them over here. I have some copies of the legislation and things as well. Accepting this does not obligate you to do anything. And I think that's an important key for people to have in here. It does give you the ability, if all else fails, that you can pretty much make determinations to get close to whatever the plan designs are in the GIC, or join the GIC directly. But I want to emphasize again, if you pass that, it only needs to be passed once, and the fundamental thing is that you now give your management team, an extra tool when it comes to negotiating in there. More than half of the communities out there now have accepted 21 through 23, and actually of the other ones, many of them are in joint purchase groups where a lot of the same things have happened, whether or not it's been formally through 21 through 20 and 23. And a lot of communities have just come to agreement in order to not go. The bargaining groups have said, look, we'll go along with the plan design, we just don't want to do that thing. Well, if you get to the plan design changes in there, that it doesn't really make a lot of difference how you get there. This is not in any way to try to penalize employees. This is basically saying that this is something that has been recognized as a weakness in the negotiating strategies out there, and this is a tool to help you make some changes. So basically, I think...
Are there any downsides to accepting it?
I'm sorry?
Are there any downsides to accepting it?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, in most cases, when you first are proposing it, and there's some very strict rules you have to go by in order to accept it. And this is not part of the discussion tonight because, again, we'd be in violation of that law. In order for you to accept it, you would have to notify all your bargaining units at least 2 days before you brought it up at the meeting. Generally speaking, there are a lot of negative feelings from employees, and I think the rationale, as much as anything, is it's the fear of the unknown, that they're concerned that this interferes with some of their bargaining positions, and in fact it does. But downside, I don't really see a lot. I mean, I think, as I said in the beginning, and I think it's an important point, that if you accept that, it's something, it's a tool that you have available to you, but nobody says you have to use it. It just simply puts you in a position to make some choices. And I'll speed up here because I know you got a full agenda, but again, I mentioned Affordable Care Act, acting on it. By the way, we do, hopefully you got the notice on our seminar on some of that stuff for the 23rd of July. And that's on a lot of the reporting things that we're doing. So the other thing I would recommend is obviously remaining in good contact. I don't know how active your Insurance Advisory Committee is, but I think with any of these things it makes a lot of sense to include them on all the discussions so that they're not in the dark. Eventually you're going to have to explain everything to the bargaining groups anyway. So questions or anything else I can help you with?
That was great. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be talking with you further as the subject comes up again.
Okay.
And just to follow up, our next discussion on this, what we're hoping would be July regarding the Insurance Advisory Committee.
Great. Thanks, Ira. Thanks, everyone.
You mean I covered everything?
I think so. It was perfect. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for your time. So next we've got a short item. David, you'll lead the discussion on this update and consideration of the charge for the Public Safety Committee.
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago that the Board of Selectmen had started talking about developing a Public Safety Committee that would take on issues that fall outside of Traffic Safety Committee. And about a year ago, there was a charge that was made to put a Public Safety Committee together, and it had involved some staff, and it also involved certain designees from certain boards. And now the Public Safety Committee has officially gotten off the ground, and Arthur Fenno is the chair of that committee. And the committee had discussed possible changes to bring back to the Board of Selectmen in that charge. So I was going to let Arthur talk about what those changes might be.
Good evening.
Yes, good.
I'm Arthur Fenn. I'm the chairperson of the Public Safety Committee. It's a pleasure to be here. So essentially, and I think it's somewhat spelled out in the form, the committee has had a challenge since the beginning with having a quorum. We have 10 members, ostensibly, so a quorum for us is 6. And that's posed a challenge right from the outset of conducting the committee's business efficiently and gathering everyone together in a timely manner to discuss any issues that come up before the committee. I know there were some issues with some of the liaison committees and getting designees from them, like the Board of Health and Council on Aging. We did have Sean Killeen from Traffic Safety on a regular basis. But it was felt by the committee that we had sort of a core membership of the police chief, the fire chief, CM&D, building commissioner, the 2 residents, and the town administrator. I think I'm not forgetting anybody. And that the business of the committee could sort of most efficiently be considered by those groups, or by those members, with input as needed from other people, whether it be from other boards, other committees who were part of that, like traffic safety, or who were not, like part of the schools. And so in order to sort of make the business of the committee function more efficiently with sort of a smaller core membership, we've toyed around with different ideas, but it was the committee's feeling that if we narrowed it down to this sort of core group, that would serve the functions of the committee most efficiently.
Great, thanks. David, I have a question for you. You've put this, or maybe Arthur and the committee have put this in front of us because you're having trouble getting a quorum, and you gave us a Attorney General's guideline which talks about a
quorum constitutes a simple majority of the members. I guess it says that unless there's a law that says otherwise, basically. This is not a statutory body. This is not a body that's even created by a town bylaw. This is an appointed body created by the Board of Selectmen. Is there anything that would prevent us from defining a quorum differently?
Arthur spent most of the time looking at this. I think if you defined a quorum, then that would override that, but...
No, I think that's right, and I think that's another way to address it, is if you specifically said, of this, a quorum is this number of people or these certain members, then I think that would also address that issue.
You know, and the reason I say that is I appreciate where you're coming from. It is hard to pull meetings together. On the other hand, your proposal would disenfranchise from voting the Board of Health. I know you and David have a difference as to whether traffic safety should be a voting member, but it would take what I would see as some of the core members of this committee, and it would turn them into advisory members instead of voting members, and I'm just not sure if that's an advantage or not. So, I mean, I think that's something we need to discuss up here within the context, but I just wanted to know if that is a feasible alternative way to handle it, just define a quorum as 5 members or some other number of members, 4 members, whatever makes sense, or a majority of the members in attendance can vote.
Sure. And, I mean, I do want to say, I'm not looking to exclude anybody, and I think I always feel more voices the better decision, the better the outcome, and the better the product. But just in terms of kind of the actual people to be there in order to get the business done.
Yeah, no, I wasn't questioning.
Okay, no,
it was more just the practicality of the way it works out. And I don't know, Paul, if you have any thoughts just from a municipal lawyer standpoint on whether you've seen boards define a quorum differently.
I don't recommend it.
Okay.
There's a lot that could be said, but because for various reasons, it's probably not the best idea to provide a legal analysis of how that might work in this particular forum. But for a lot of practical reasons, it's much better to have a majority of a quorum, have a majority be the quorum. It's basically state law that provides that. And there's an uncertainty about whether a simple Board of Selectmen vote can override state law.
This
Probably.
is not, even if this is a board that's not established by state law.
Yeah. So there's some uncertainty.
Yeah, I don't read the statute that way, but I understand what you're saying.
It's something for offline, maybe talking to council, maybe.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a thing we could do is put it to council for advice on how to handle something like this. Go ahead.
I have no problem with the town administrator's proposal. I think it makes sense to have a committee that's actually workable in terms of size, and 10 members seems very unworkable. Just making the phone calls to find out when people are available. We see how much trouble we had getting 5 members all together at the same time for meetings here. Doubling that with 10 people just seems to put an awful burden on everybody. And I thought the town administrator's proposal here, which would keep...
That's the original one there.
Yeah, but it would keep traffic safety on it. I agreed with that notion.
That's that one.
It seemed like it made a lot of sense, so I don't think it's a good idea to try to change the quorum rules. We can talk about it.
The quorum requirements are distinct from the voting requirements. What I'm concerned about is taking 2 committees, which to me are logically on a committee like this, Board of Health and Council on Aging, and saying to them, yeah, you can be advisory, but you no longer have a vote. Now, maybe the answer to that is, well, you didn't show up at the meetings, so you don't have a vote. We had to change things. But on the other hand, if there's an opportunity to be inclusive, it seems to me it makes sense to be inclusive with those groups on a committee that's called Public Safety, so you know, we advisedly last year thought that having representation from those two boards along with these other boards was a good idea. And so I still think it's a good idea. Maybe others disagree.
Those committees are on the Emergency Management Committee.
Uh-huh.
You know, and they do meet, and that's led by the fire chief. That's, but they're not, actually, I don't think we've had anyone attend the committee meetings yet from those other boards.
Well, I mean, I think possibly another solution, which is one I had initially pursued, and then the committee sort of felt differently, is sort of in general. I think there was an issue with Health and Council on Aging. Their designees needed, I guess they needed some additional approval by this board, and that didn't happen. There was something that their designees never made it to our committee, or they never designated somebody. I'm not really sure what it was. But as I read the Attorney General's regulations, they're still considered part of the 10. It affects our quorum, whether there's a vacancy there for whatever reason. It might be that if the committee charge were changed to word it such that keeping them as voting members, but only upon appointment or something along those lines, such that when there wasn't somebody appointed, when it wasn't confirmed, whatever those extra steps were, then they wouldn't sort of count against our quorum, for lack of a better phrase.
Dave, do you know what the issue was with those members?
I mean, in the past, sometimes the selectmen have specified that a committee can have their designee, and then that committee votes, and that activates the person on the committee. We were going with that we wanted those people to be...
To recommend somebody who we would then appoint.
Right.
And that never happened, is what you're saying.
No, we did bring one forward, and it wasn't acted on, and the other two never brought a name forward. And then one of those committees had thought that they were going to kind of rotate people through, and that was, I didn't see how that was going to work. So there's a little bit of, procedurally we need to decide whether each of those designees need to come in front of this board again to be appointed to that committee, or if the committee's vote of that designee is enough to activate them to participate in the committee. Did I explain that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I mean, it might be possible to define the membership as somebody who has been through that vetting process or whatever that process was, and until that point, then it doesn't count as a vacancy. They're not a member until then. And that way, they still have a voting member, and when that happens, they come to the Public Safety Committee, and it's as if, as it was originally set up in the charge. But until then, for instance, if the person from the Council on Aging hasn't done that, then our committee members only number 9, or if we're missing 2, then they would only be 8.
Right.
But again, it might be a question for town council as to how to specifically word that, or not to run afoul of anything.
Sean, you look like you got a
I do.
comment. Yep.
I have a couple comments. One, I didn't know Arthur Fino before we created this committee, and I want to commend him. This is his first committee he's been on. We as a committee chose him as the chair. Not this committee, but I was on public safety, and it's been awesome watching him. He's relatively new to town compared to many of us, and he embraced it. He read up on the laws, which he's obviously good at doing, and he's done a good job of forming and kind of working with the scope, because it wasn't all that well defined. And that's where we're at right now. Still tweaking it a little. So I just wanted to commend him for that. It's been enjoyable to see a somewhat younger face in committees, which is what I'm really striving to start recruiting.
What are you trying to say here, Sean?
I'm trying to say that you guys all joined committees when you were close to mine and his age, and I think that's fallen off, perhaps.
And we knew he was a newer member because he has
trying to pick up on that a little bit.
We already got that point.
I wasn't trying to say that. I was trying to commend him. But I also want to make a couple comments on that committee, because I've missed a few meetings, but I've been to a majority of them, and it has been difficult. But if you look at the list, it's been a very good working group of people, and it became evident that most of that list is the people that can actually act on things almost immediately, right? It's the police chief, it's the fire chief, it's the building inspector. Those are people that can walk out of that, they can take a vote, and CM&D director, and actually go act on things. So some of it isn't big policy stuff. Some of it is slightly, you know, it's some day-to-day stuff that actually can get acted on. I wouldn't say that Board of Health necessarily falls into that category, especially if it's, say, their administrator that gets chosen to be in the meeting. She'd be voting in public safety on behalf of her board, which doesn't sound like it's really quite as workable. And it hasn't been, because they've never been there. And they haven't really reached out to the committee to say, hey, we want to be included. I don't know that the committee's going to suffer, or the charge of what we were trying to do is going to suffer by them not. They're certainly more than willing to come, and we've had Principal of Pine Hill, Barbara Brown, at almost nearly every meeting.
It's regularly these days, yes.
And we've spoken to her about it. She could care less if she's a voting member or not. She wanted to be part of it, because there was some issues that were being discussed with Pine Hill and access and everything else. So she was there. There was value in her being there. She wasn't going to vote, but she got to express her concerns. And they're open meetings, so other groups can do the same.
And one alternative, a middle ground, would be to have the TA, Board of Health, and COA members as non-voting members. I agree with Paul, 10's a big number. That's a large, unwieldy board.
What would that do to the quorum part of it?
I think
you just need a majority of the voting members to attend?
Right.
Yeah.
So then it's down to 4 members?
It's 4 out of 7, yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think I've heard a few different ways that the groups that I was trying to be inclusive of haven't been as interested as some of the other groups. So I'm on board with what Sean said at this point. And I guess, Arthur, with the modification that David suggested of adding traffic safety, I would be on board with that.
Were you adding on the ex officios of those other ones, or just?
I think it's fine if they don't have to count for the quorum, because that would defeat the whole purpose.
Right.
Of what we were trying to.
I believe we checked on that.
Yeah.
If their ex officios don't count into the number of the quorum, it's only voting members.
I don't know the exact answer. I think you can be ex officio and voting, and so you might want to specify ex officio non-voting. I mean, I've seen that.
You're correct.
Really?
You have to, ex officio only means by virtue of your position, you have another position.
Right, so they would want to be non-voting in that.
Right.
Observer status.
We've kind of defined
Yes.
the problem here? Okay.
But I'm
Good.
wondering whether we should make the school principal or superintendent or whatever is the appropriate person also a associate member or a
Officio, non-voting.
non-voting member. Pat,
I
Cass?
think we should. Was she originally a member?
I guess there were some conversations between her and I think the Board of Selectmen before I was involved in the committee, so I don't know exactly what happened, but I think there was, somebody had reached out to her, and she had the understanding that.
I actually invited her. I mentioned that that's the board that would probably be important to include the principal because potential safety issues at the school.
And she continued to come.
So David, can you come back to our next meeting with a revised charge that we can vote on that'll pick up this commentary?
Why can't we do it right now? Just adopt this with making...
What would you add the school superintendent?
As
ex officio.
Or school committee?
Ex officio, non-voting.
Right.
Add Council on Aging, Board of Health as ex officio, non-voting, and the town administrator ex officio, non-voting.
So you have
And it should be a designee of the superintendent. I don't think you want to burden the superintendent with needing
That's
to
right.
come.
Or designate the school committee, whichever, maybe it's the Pine Hill School Committee.
I don't know. I mean, I would say that she was there on behalf of the superintendent.
Yeah, I
Right?
mean, yes, I would say that she's kind of representing, I mean, I would expect that if there was an issue, she would be communicating back to the superintendent.
Okay, great.
Right.
But
Great.
So can I make that motion? Or do you want to table it?
I'd like that.
I know, I think the cemetery commission wants in on this, too.
The cemetery commission wants to be part of it.
They're dead. They're dead.
Yes, Commissioner.
She cleans up after the safety fails.
I had a question as far as traffic safety. Kurt, you say they're in, they're out, and this, and
I think they're in.
They're in.
They're in.
okay, I lost track.
They're in.
As a voting member.
In Lake Flynn.
Susan has been to all the meetings.
I haven't been to the meetings. Usually as a representative of the cemetery commission.
Yeah, the motion I want to make is that the Board of the town administrator's recommended motion, namely that the Board of Selectmen reduce the membership of the Public Safety Committee to the following members: the police chief, the fire chief, CMD director, the building inspector, traffic safety committee designee, 2 at-large residents, and the following non-voting members: town administrator ex officio, superintendent of schools or its designee, ex officio,
Board of Health.
Board of Health or their designee, ex officio, and Council on Aging or their designee, ex officio.
And the last two, I would say the designee of the Council on Aging and the designee of the Board of Health. We don't need the whole board there.
Yeah.
But with that friendly amendment, I'll second your motion. Yep.
Accepted.
Any further discussion on this?
Does this eliminate the requirement for us to appoint somebody, or does this allow the boards involved to appoint somebody directly to the committee?
It's still not addressed in that motion. We still got to sort that out.
Well, the only board member who is a voting member that's not specified as a traffic safety committee designee. And the way that's worded as a designee of the traffic safety committee, it appears that that's someone voted by the traffic safety committee and not by this board.
So we'll interpret it that way,
Okay.
right? I mean,
Unless you want to change it, I have to.
I think it should be interpreted.
We could add, for purposes of clarity, the
Yeah.
designees
It's
don't have to
redundant
be.
for them to bring that back.
I agree. I completely agree, yeah. Good.
And we can certainly amend it to add that for clarity, designees do not require Board of Selectmen approval. Unless you want to do that for traffic safety.
I'm happy to add it for,
Okay, good, that's a further amendment.
it almost doesn't matter for the ex officio members, but
Right.
the voting members, I think it does matter.
Right.
So I accept that as a friendly amendment. It's the second friendly amendment, so it's getting a little
An even
complicated.
friendlier amendment, yes. Okay, so any further discussion? All in favor of the motion as amended? Aye. Another unanimous vote. Okay, good, thanks, Paul, that was great.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thanks, Arthur.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you. Thanks, Arthur. Thanks for all the hard work, too. It's great.
My pleasure.
Okay, now the
That's why we have so many lawyers.
main show. Roger, you're leading this discussion, I think, right? Okay, good. You and Carol, or, no, just Roger, you're getting pointed at. Okay.
And thank you to the Public Safety Chair.
Thank you very much.
Love handouts.
It's one of your famous multicolored maps here.
One each.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, this doesn't have nearly as many colors as Roger's usually famous for here. Let's see.
I have this.
This is Carol Boyce. She's the engineer that's been working with the town of Framingham on the general chemical cleanup project for many years.
4.
Is that all?
And, yeah, a little over 4 in capacity in Framingham, yeah.
This first picture here is gives you a layout of where this area is. It's the yellow splotch there. It's off of Leland Street in Framingham. There's a facility there called General Chemical that for decades, spilled a lot of stuff into the local brook or ditch that drains in the coarse brook that goes through Sherborn and into Natick. There's on the order of 50,000 pounds of stuff that they dumped there. It's virtually all of it is various kinds of chlorinated solvents that are used for dry cleaning, degreasing, things like that. Not terribly dangerous, but it decomposes into stuff that's vaporous that could get into your basement and that sort of thing. So it's not a nice thing to be dealing with. A couple of houses right next to their facility they had to buy because they were getting vapors into their basements and posing a hazard. The DEP has been after them for 15 years.
Since the license was issued, probably in 1986, yeah.
Trying to clean this up. There's a obvious evidence that some of the stuff does leak into Sherborn, particularly down the ditch and in the coarse brook. There's also a leak that goes into the abandoned MWRA aqueduct that runs through there and goes across essentially Speen Street and on through Sherborn. Stuff from the site has been leaking into there and being dumped out into Coarse Brook. The DEP tested 22 public wells in the area. They sent out invitations, and I think they sent out 30 invitations of
the private wells.
And 22 people signed up. A couple came back with hits of stuff that wouldn't be related to the general chemical site, but I believe 5 houses had trace amounts, and I mean really trace amounts of some of the same chemicals that are in the general chemical site. Well below any safety limits and well below any legislated detection limits. If you hit a certain level of detection of a chemical that's listed, you then have to report it. It may not even be dangerous at that level, but you do have to report it. Everything they found so far is below that. Some of them are close, but so what they're finding is apparently in the Sherborn wells at very safe levels. But the question is, what happens next? The General Chemical for years is saying, well, this stuff never gets into the bedrock. It's all trapped in this bowl, and if we can get in there and clean it up, we'll all be happy. Well, it's quite obvious that that isn't true. For example, there's a car wash right across the street from them that has a pretty deep bedrock well, and they have chemicals in their water that they pump out of the bedrock. And we have this cluster of detections in Sherborn, in a pretty isolated area. It's conceivable that it was local contamination. A lot of this stuff was used by households in the past. That's not used anymore, but you know, the well's very in depth from 100 to 600 feet, so thinking that it's an isolated event, it stretches the imagination. The town, partly through me as a volunteer, have been going to these meetings for some time and commenting to the DEP. The DEP has gotten, I think, more serious about this in the past couple of years. They've transferred it from one division that just sort of worried about it to a division that's responsible for cleaning it up, so the whole attitude changed. And from our perspective, we're really worried about the public wells. They're fairly remote from the site, but they do have these chemicals in it, and the DEP had not planned on coming back to test these wells. I think we may change their mind. The contractor that's doing the study has never suggested that they test these wells. The DEP has told the contractor that they really need to go and test the 2 or 3 agricultural ponds that are in the valley there. That's probably used for livestock and irrigation and things like that. They have not been tested, but they will be. The contractor has recently issued a report trying to summarize the condition of the place and assess the risks and that sort of thing. So we're in the process of commenting on what we think about that. And I wrote a page and a half, as you have here, about what I think is going on. Carol wrote a book.
Well, I had consulting help too, so
Yeah.
additional, highly technical.
So she can probably add many details and answer more questions than I can.
We're talking about the comprehensive site assessment report dated March 2, 2015.
That's correct.
And the comments that have been filed on that, are comments still open at this point, or is the comment period closed?
The comment period is closed.
And you've submitted comments on behalf of Sherborn, and I thank you for that.
Yeah.
There is a wonderful, absolutely wonderful presentation by the Board of Health of the town of Framingham dated May 4th, 2015. I found myself smiling all the way through reading this. It was so comprehensive. Did you play a role in that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
It was so thorough, so comprehensive, and so systematically demolished their analysis that you left nothing.
Thank you.
You left nothing of their analysis. I love to see that kind of thorough, painstaking, brick by brick building of a complete demolition of their position. It was a thing of beauty. Loved it.
Just wish he'd done it for the Wells report as well.
Yeah. Just a couple of comments on, or questions about that. Most concerned about your comments that the concentrations are increasing over time rather than diluting, which one would normally expect that there'd be dilution. And so you reached the conclusion that there is some kind of concentration that's continuing to generate contamination.
Right, that's correct.
And that hasn't really been found or identified?
Well, I think what's going on out at the site is that there's actually a very significant, what we call source area. So while the operations, I don't know if you know this, but the operations at the General Chemical have been shut down, which we kind of consider a victory in the town of Framingham because of not only the past history, but also the type of operation that was being run, and also being next to one of the biggest elementary school in Framingham, like immediately adjacent to the biggest elementary school. You know, some of the issue is that the past operation, so it was a solvent recovery operation starting in the 60s, a lot of spillage at the plant, you know, probably 17 to 25 above ground or underground tanks, you know, 10,000 gallons. We're talking large volumes of solvent use and recovery and spillage. And so what happened is that material just went over time, you know, really for 20, 30, 40 years, can't really specifically say, but a long time. And then that material has migrated slowly with the groundwater flow, which immediately in the area of General Chemical is to the southwest, I would say, right, west-southwest, right where General Chemical is. But then it's pooled up and just sits there because this material is very, very difficult to get rid of in the environment. It sits there, you know, sort of like it's in a bathtub, and then as the groundwater flows through and around it, it will take the dissolved portion off that and create a huge plume from there. So I can't give you the exact dimensions, but the source area, I would say, is something like, I would say about 200 by 400 feet and about 40, that's the area of the source problem, with a thickness of about 40 feet thick. So that's a significant amount of mass that is sitting in the environment and has come to be located there. That in of itself may not be moving, but the dissolved component that comes off of that will migrate and continue to dissolve and come off for a long time, you know, generations, let's put it that way. So this is our concern, and it always has been. If you want me to give a little bit of, if you have more questions, I would love to hear questions and the things you want to hear.
Well, the other question I would have is,
ahead.
in your report, you say that there are fractures in the bedrock. So
Right.
rather than it being a bathtub that's holding this brew of chemicals, it's actually leaking somewhere, or could be leaking.
Exactly.
Because bedrock wells are picking up some contaminants, I gather, or some of the monitoring wells. Is that true, that the stuff is leaking into bedrock or beyond?
Well, this is a real point of contention. And to give you the answer, I'm going to just back up really quickly and give you a little bit of what I try to do when I have a generalized audience, which I don't know what your background is. I'm actually not a hydrogeologist. I'm actually a scientist. I have a master's degree in public health. But I've been working in this field as a licensed site professional doing this cleanup actually since before we were licensed. We were licensed in 1993, and it goes all the way back to when I started working, I hate to tell you this, but started working at Mass DEP myself in the Central Region in 1983. So that's how long I've been doing this. This is probably one of the top 10 to 20 sites, probably top 10, I would say, of worst case sites I have seen in my career, which usually normally are considered Superfund sites. The only reason we're not using the word Superfund here is because of the program that it was in, which was a different program, and it ended up in the RECRA corrective action, which sounds a little more benign than Superfund. But that gives you a general idea of how bad this is. And not necessarily, I don't mean in terms of exposure to people, because if there were exposures to people, DEP would be all over this in a heartbeat in terms of current, short-term, ongoing exposures. And you heard Roger say that they did get rid of, they bought 4 houses, moved the residents out because of the contamination coming in. And one of the first things I did when I came to Framingham, and I have to hand it to Ethan Mascoop and Mike Hugo and the Board of Health in Framingham for really starting the charge and leading the charge, because they were on that before I even came on board. But one of my first tasks was to go into one of the houses where the groundwater had entered the basement due to some flooding. Typical, the groundwater goes up and down, and take a sample of the water in her basement, which had chlorinated solvents in it that they were walking around in, and it was off-gassing into her house, and she had a young child, 5-year-old or 7-year-old, in the house. And that was totally unacceptable, even though General Chemical had been trying to treat the groundwater forever. So we got some evidence that this was happening. So let me back up a little bit, because what I want you to do is try to visualize what we visualize as scientists or engineers working in this field. I basically try to get people to understand that when we're looking at a problem in the environment, it's like slicing through some cake. So everybody loves cake, right? So it's like a layered cake. So say there's a vanilla top part, there's that yummy chocolate in the middle, and then there's maybe chocolate on the bottom, right? And so then when you cut down through that, you're going to see various layers, right? So you're going to see the vanilla, you're going to see the icing, a little bit of that, and you're going to see the chocolate. That's exactly what we're doing when we're actually doing these borings into the environment. So we're constructing a 3-dimensional view of what that, not just that face of that cut of the cake looks like, but what the entire cake looks like. So to answer your question, the problem we have is that in the, let's say the vanilla portion, the top portion of the cake, that's soil, what we call the overburden. And that's like sand at the beach, let's say. Not in this case, but it's more like soil, what you think of as soil or sand at the beach. Material and groundwater can flow quicker through that material, obviously. So that's where we're having that movement at first. And then there are different layers as you go down geologically. The stratigraphy, as you go down deeper, usually tends to get harder. So, for example, there could be something called a till layer, where that icing would be in the middle, which is a hard material. And then beneath the till, in this situation, there's bedrock, Or like when you're driving down the Mass Pike and you see a cut on the road and the groundwater coming out of that with the fractures, that's the rock. So that's actually the bedrock that you're looking at. And the groundwater flows through the soil particles in the top part, and the fractures, or these almost like a pipe, like you'd see on the Mass Pike coming out of the rock. It comes through the fractures in the rock. In this situation, the pool of water is in the top, the pool of the contamination is in the top. What their consultant essentially is saying is that there's a layer, this icing in the middle, this till hard layer, where the contaminants come to rest and sit on top of that. And there's such a hard layer there's such a layer of till there that's so tight, it's not allowing it to go through into the bedrock to reach those fractures. Our hydrogeologist is saying, you don't have enough evidence for that here, and they go there. I will not go into the hydrogeological arguments back and forth, but basically what we're saying is you have places where that till layer is very, very thin. You know, that middle part of the icing in the cake is very thin, so thin that the contaminants can go down in, reach the bedrock, and then do exactly what you're saying, which is going through the fractures. Once they're in the fractured bedrock, they will travel in many different directions. It's because it's just like a pipeline. It's not necessarily, generally the flow direction is towards Sherborn, but it can go in different directions. And generally the flow direction from the wetland area near General Chemical is towards Lake Cochituate, because that's your generalized regional flow is coming through Sherborn, down Coarse Brook, and into Lake Cochituate. So the crux of the matter is this huge pool in the top part of the geologic system reaching the bedrock and thereby potentially reaching the bedrock in Sherborn and maybe the private wells that you have in the area. So DEP did these tests first and foremost because their priority is somebody drinking this water. We don't care where it's coming from. If someone's drinking water and has contamination in it, it should be addressed. So that it was nice enough of them to come and do you really a big favor and it'll save you a lot of money by coming in and testing 29 of these private wells. The difference on the takeaway is, and Roger's absolutely correct, the concentrations, and I'm happy for the homeowners because this is really important. I know it involves a lot of health issues and risks and things like that. But the good news for them is the levels that they found were all within acceptable drinking water limits. So that's very good news. But there's a second side to this, which is, to me, if you're finding any detection in a bedrock well, why is that there? I mean, they tested what you're drinking out of the tap, all below standards, all acceptable, all fine. That's good news for a homeowner. But as a scientist or an engineer, LSP, licensed site professional, I'm thinking, where did that come from? And P.S., I never just do one test of anything to find out, is that the number? And so I think they sort of relaxed when they found that there was not, you know, the concentrations were acceptable, which is, I think everybody was relieved. But on the other hand, I think they almost relaxed too much, and they said, well, if we can't find a connection way over in Framingham over to Sherborn, we don't think the connection's there. So that's a real important fight that needs to happen, in our opinion. And that's why our comment was, we believe it is reaching the bedrock. And even if it's reaching the bedrock at, oh, I don't know, 20 parts per billion or 50 parts per billion, by the time it gets to someone's house, it could be 10 parts per billion, and the drinking water level is 5. So, you know, by the time you bring it up to the faucet and you test it, these compounds like to go in the air. They like to be volatile. So when you pour it into a cup to test or, you know, to drink, it will mostly be gone. So that's kind of good news for people who might be drinking it, but there's other exposures like Roger talked about, indoor air exposures and things like that. So does that help? I hope that wasn't too long-winded for...
Yeah, we all have lots of questions, it sounds like. So is it this 200 by 400 by 40 foot?
And yeah, don't quote me exactly on the, but I'm trying to give you an idea
right?
of how big.
It's
yes,
sort of,
big.
Sort of saturated
blob.
Saturated soil. Is that what it like?
Contaminated. Yeah, it's saturated soil.
And is it homogeneous?
No, because we don't have a nice vanilla cake. We usually have, when we have a soil layer, it's mixed sands and silts, so, you know, it could be tighter soils, more permeable soil, and the contamination is going to do just what the water does, which flows more in the permeable layers.
As the water goes through it, it could potentially hit pockets that are more or less contaminated.
Right.
And most of these things are denser than water, so they tend to pool at the bottom, and hopefully there is a bowl there that's captured all this, but we don't think they did.
So has, a couple of things. One, have they started any corrective action there? And two, is this company still in business? And what's the, I noticed one of your comments had to do with financial security, but what are the arrangements there for financial security for a cleanup?
Right. Well, another very important point, I'm glad you brought that up, is that they, under the consent order, that they're under an administrative consent order to finish this work. They've moved it from the RCRA, which is the hazardous waste program, over to the waste site cleanup program. So in that move, because they had a corrective action under one bureaucratic location and they moved it to another, they actually made an administrative consent order which gave them deadlines and schedule for what they had to do.
And it's under the state now?
And that's,
it's not EPA?
You're right, it's under the state. There was some oversight from EPA before, but it's pretty much with the state.
The site's still active, right? But it's as an intermodal facility or something?
Yeah, what's left there, across the street is a company which you may be familiar with called Clean Venture, which is the transportation arm related to a parent company, the parent company of General Chemical. So the General Chemical facility itself, all the operations related to hazardous waste are closed. They don't have their license anymore. But there is a fuel tank, above ground tank left. So the trucks from Clean Ventures on the north side of Leland can come over and fuel up on the south side, but they cannot leave or have hazardous waste over on that side.
But you were talking about the corrective action and the financial security. I mean.
Oh, right. So I'm sorry. So for financial security, as part of that, that carried over from the previous RCRA program, the corrective action, which requires them to set up a escrow account and have a financial analysis every year of what they think they need. They say their need is $1.8 million. It was 1.5. They edged it up to 1.8 million. I frankly think that's woefully inadequate. That if you do this right, if there's a drinking water connection, and we think there can be, and the cleanup has to go to drinking water standards, I think what you're at is more like anywhere from at least 2 or 3 million to maybe a 10 or 15 million cleanup. So, but that's just, Carol Boyce saying, I don't think there's enough here. We've done some battles about, we just said it's not enough, and we've asked DEP and EPA to weigh in on having them reserve more. So
I had a question. The May 4th Framingham Board of Health letter to DEP talked about the testing on coarse brook contamination. It said that contamination is observed as far downstream coarse brook is sampled, but that it wasn't sampled far enough. Is there any plans to sample further? Looking at the map, it doesn't look like they've sampled on coarse brook very far at all, if I'm reading it correctly.
Right. And the other interesting thing about the map, so the orange, if you see the orange delineation, the very interesting thing is in every Phase 2 report, in a minute I'll give you like what the schedule is and how this works and what the end point hopefully is. But at the end of every Phase 2 report, you have to do a delineation of the disposal site, and that is everywhere that the contamination has come to be located. It's really interesting how the contaminants know how to stop at the town line between Framingham and Sherborn. I think Roger pointed out that the contaminants knew that the taxes were too high or something. So, but seriously, if you look at this, you can see they did a very strict interpretation. We just sampled here, we found something here, it must just be running down this brook and nowhere else. So this is really disingenuous. This is a representation of what we're getting from the other consultant. Now the other consultant, I have to say, is head and shoulders above what they had in the past, which will just tell you something about what we saw in the past and why we started to raise such a commotion in Framingham about you need to get this act together. So yeah, so the ways that you can have, what we look at are the so let me back up for a minute and tell you what the overall plan is for how this, and what DEP requires and is going to require from them. We're at a place where they need to examine where is all the contamination, where is it going, where could it possibly go in the future, and who would be exposed, and what are the risks. So that's generally called a Phase 2 report and a risk characterization. So they generated something called a Phase 2 report, but as you can see, we're telling them that it's inadequate. They said they wanted a few more samples. We said we want a lot more information. So the way this works now is DEP becomes, and there were comments from Sherborn, which is great, from other entities, Exelon Corporation, they've contaminated their property, and some other parties. But what will happen now is DEP will take those comments, and the consultant, GES, for General Chemical is actually the person that's supposed to take the comments, because this is coming from a public information site. We call it a public information plan, or PIP site. So this specifically was requested to be an extra bit of information given out because it's labeled now as a public info site, a PIP site. So now we have this opportunity to comment. So we made all these comments, and now normally the consultant for General Chemical would take the comments, pull them together, and do a response. But really what's happening in this particular situation is DEP is acting as the arbiter between their consultant and all these comments. And I think DEP will come down on them with, here's the synthesis of the comments, here's the response, and then this is what we'll make you do. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I believe there will be more sampling, but we just don't know yet. And then after this phase is done, and again, you know, these are tortuous. I know they take like geologic time to happen, but another year is what I'm thinking should be enough to wrap up what sampling needs to happen. And you might see that one of our comments was the very next phase is when you do a feasibility study. You basically look at all your options, how can you clean it up, and then you pick one, and then you go to, that's phase 3. Phase 4 is you go and you design your system to get this thing cleaned up. So one of our points to them was, don't spend the rest of eternity sampling. If you go out and do another round of samples, please synthesize it as soon as and rapidly as possible into what your options can be for remediation. And they're very, in my opinion, fairly limited options. They had already in the past tried to do some chemical, there's something called chemical oxidation, where you can inject some particular chemicals and it will break down this material. But the material, as Roger said, it's the actual pure product. It's not just a dissolved phase, which is easier to treat. It's the actual, if you took a drum of this material and dumped it in the ground, and that is very difficult to treat with chemical oxidation. They tried it once, and they actually managed to push the contamination around closer to the school, and so when everybody alerted them to that, they actually stopped that pilot program. So there may be some pilot testing of certain remediation options that they might ask for, but I would really hope that by next summer they would have some remediation options on the table after having done an excellent, hopefully, analysis of additional information, considering all these questions that are out there still.
Can I just summarize that?
Yep.
That no remedial steps are going to be taken in the near future because they have to finish the comprehensive site work. And based on the comments that you've done, it seems reasonably likely that DEP is going to say to them they need to do more work on the comprehensive site analysis. The analysis has to be done before there's any remediation.
Exactly, yeah.
It's good that we're requiring them to do all these things, but the downside is the remediation doesn't start until they've done and gathered all the information. And of course, to figure out what remediation is necessary, you need to have all the information.
Right.
And what they are presenting is minimizing the risk and the exposure and the extent if, as indicated in the letter from Framingham, all these other issues are out there. We need to know that before you decide on remediation.
Right.
But in the meantime, things go on. And so the question I would have is, at this point, you're not really asking for the town of Sherborn to do anything. I gather this is just a report. because the comment period's closed. We have to wait for DEP to analyze all of that and maybe get a response from GES, the consultant for the responsible party. They got to assemble all of that. So what can we as a board do, or what would you be looking for? We're quite comfortable with, or at least I'm quite comfortable with everything Roger's done and the positions he's taken and the things that he's asked to be done. But what can we do?
Well, I would suggest that one thing that you could do is that even though the comment period is closed, if you decide that this issue of the private well testing and the potential connection to the bedrock is a significant issue enough for you to raise to DEP, you know, you can raise that at any point. It doesn't matter if the comment period is closed.
But Roger raised that.
Right. I mean, if you
start annual testing of the Sherborn wells, and I think we're all in agreement with that.
I'm telling you that the more the merrier, so that, you know, a Board of Selectmen weighing in, a Board of Health weighing in, you know, private parties weighing in.
Congressmen, senators.
I mean, my sense is, I don't know that the people who are on the other side of this thing are getting the impression that we're really interested in this. They haven't, you know, thank God Roger's been going, thank you very much, and thank you for the work you've done, and also for coming and spending your evening with us. But it's Roger's one guy, and it would seem to me that they ought to be hearing loud and clear from this board, from the Board of Health. And does Framingham have legal counsel that's working on this?
Yeah, we have town counsel. Right now,
and I mean, and
not working
you're
on
copying your legislative representatives on this, and I think
Santa Candro, Chris Walsh, Karen Spilka.
I think we just need to ramp this thing up.
Do we have legal counsel working on this?
No. We have the same counsel, though.
You use Chris Petrini?
Yeah.
Right.
Do we have any of the residents in the room here today who are affected?
Anybody on Coursebrook or?
Is anybody notified? Well, it would be
and also
Kendall Street and Meadowbrook. But you know, I think I'd want to know that the residents want their wells tested before I was pushing DEP.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I think in the interest of the town and as residents, we have a volunteer working on this. And, I mean, we all work on a lot of stuff as volunteers. And it's a little different in...
Almost every owner that was asked to participate did. And they all got reports, and none of them went back to the DEP, because the DEP response was pretty clear. You have some stuff in your well. Right now, it's not dangerous. Okay. So, but I'm sure if you went back to these same people, they'd say, let's do it again. I don't think there's any hesitation.
Would it make sense for us as a board to send to General Chemical and DEP Roger's letter saying that we endorse it and that we urge them to take the actions that are needed listed at the bottom of the letter? I think this is a terrific letter. That certainly would signal that the Board of Selectmen is concerned. They've already gotten it from the Water Commissioner. It's just us rubber stamping it, basically. But it certainly addresses your issue, Mark, of making it clear that another board is very interested in this.
I think, you know, one other comment is DEP has become and been very responsive to us. I think we started off on a little bit rocky footing because we were so critical and so demanding that, you know, we're in an environmental justice area. There's a lot of lip service a while ago that was given to environmental justice. But we really wanted to see some action. There's no, I mean, obviously our environmental justice areas, which are areas that are designated because of, you know, minority status, English as a second language, economic status, things like that. And we had all 4 criteria that were hit in this area. And of course, it's generally in an industrial area, the, you know, historical industrial. So those things sometimes go hand in hand.
But there's a school and a bunch of apartments.
Right. And I just want to point out, it's not like we built the school, and the history that they give you starts in 1960. But actually, the school started in the 1920s, and the Gulf, I think it was a Gulf oil terminal that started in the 1920s. They were kind of like just little things that just kind of started in the neighborhood, and then both kind of grew up together. And So, you know what it is when you get a school, you get a little bit stuck in where you are because of the finances of trying to move a big school to another area. But my point is that DEP has gotten very cooperative with us. They've been very responsive. I really feel strongly that if you bring something to them, bring a concern to them, they are at the place now where they are more than willing to listen and talk and even come into your community and hear your the information, your questions, your concerns, and start with, the people in the regional office who have the, primary contact, maybe Steve Johnson, who's the head of the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, and the assistant commissioner in that region is Eric Worrell. But if you talk to Steve, he'll say, we've been working on this, and he'll know Roger. He'll know Roger's been concerned. But I think to hear it from other places, and they'll give you their angle on things too. But I think to hear it from, step up your game a little and say, we'd like to hear this, we'd like to hear this, we want this question answered, and also maybe talk to your community and see what your community thinks. I mean, I know it's difficult, people don't like to hear, they want to run away, but you know what, it's almost better to know what you're dealing with and then be able to get the answers that you need. In this report, they're blaming a lot of this contamination on people's septic system. That is just, can I just say blankly, it's garbage. Because a septic system is up in the top 10, 15 feet. We're talking about people's wells that are down 300, 400 feet. To me...
The good thing is on the map, it just shows on your town, not ours.
Yeah, sorry.
And are these things found in other wells in Sherborn that aren't close to this?
We don't really know, but doubtful.
We
tested 29 wells. There was a hot spot.
Yeah, I mean, these people are going to try and do everything they can to do the least amount possible, and that's just the way this is going to work.
Right.
I got a question.
Yeah, so I have a little contrary view, or maybe just at least want to throw a question out in terms of what our role is as selectmen and as the town of Sherborn. I mean, if you look at it most directly, and not to diminish anything that you're doing or disagree with anything you're doing, but if you look at it most directly, we don't have a direct asset that's affected by this. We don't have a public well. We don't have a playing field. We don't have anything that the town as an institution has to weigh in on. So if we would be weighing in, we would be weighing in on behalf of our residents who we think are affected. And before I did that, I think I would want to know that the residents would appreciate that help and would want that kind of involvement. We have a couple of big farm operations up there, and we have a number of residents who have agreed at least once to have their well tested, but how much of an issue they want us to make of this, to me, is an open question, and I would be very happy to make an issue of it if I got the sense that the residents wanted me to make an issue of it. David, we had talked about notifying the local people, at least making them aware of this. Did the word go out that we were having this meeting? I'm really surprised that there's nobody from the neighborhood here.
A mailing to them?
I didn't do a mail.
All right, well, I mean, we had talked about that was kind of part of the point of this. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. So it's a little hard to know now whether lack of attendance is because nobody's interested or just because they didn't get the word about the...
Well, I want to second what you've said because I have some information from a resident that they were concerned that if their property was identified as being subject to contamination, it was really going to hurt their resale possibility for that property. So to some extent, they did not want their property labeled like a big A on the front door as being a problem property. So I agree with the notion of let's consult with our residents and get a consensus from them as to how much do they want to have us help them. But there's a bigger issue than just those residents. This plume, if you look at everything that's being said here, this plume is affecting or could affect more people in Sherborn than are currently identified. And so we have an obligation to speak for those who aren't even born yet and those who haven't even bought their house in Sherborn.
I think we have an obligation to understand the issue and to speak up and say we want things studied. I was mostly talking about studying individual properties and insisting that certain properties be sampled if we didn't know that the residents wanted them sampled. But as far as your general point about, yes, we should know more about this problem, and we should encourage DEP to, echo what Carol and Roger said. I'm all over that. That's completely fine with me.
Yeah, and again, a little bit, I think of what everybody is struggling with is, there is this information gap. You have this place where it stops, although, to your point, it doesn't really stop there. This is going, in a general plume direction. And then the question is making the link, do you jump from the edge of the known plume to this distance away where you're not sure about that interaction, or do you try to take a step approach so that you do some bedrock wells in between where the known, where these your residential wells are and the edge of the plume. And we've tried to make the case to do that, but it's a little bit of a needle in a haystack that it just happens to be what the bedrock fractures that you hit. So I almost feel, and again, maybe you want to get some consulting advice. Maybe you want to talk to DEP about their rationale. Maybe you want, there's plenty of things that you can do to research and determine whether not sampling again is warranted or whether it is warranted, and then make a decision based on what you know from the information.
What do you think about, I've heard hydrologists tell me that if you use the analogy of a bathtub and it's holding the chemicals, every time you drill a well down into the bedrock, essentially you're putting a hole in the bottom of the well. And while you take precautions and you do all these things, you're basically the very testing itself can alter or potentially cause communication between different layers that weren't having that communication before the well was drilled.
I think they keep talking about bedrock wells they've drilled. They're about 6 feet into the bedrock. They haven't drilled any deep wells at all. And originally the DEP said to me that they were going to, since they had this information about our wells, they wanted to step back towards General Chemical and start drilling bedrock wells. And you sample as you go down, so you know what depth you hit some contaminants. So if you hit something really bad, you stop. So you don't put the straw all the way into the bottom.
Yeah, the other thing is, I think to add on to that, I think that is a concern when you're drilling down through the source area. The source area is really up close to General Chemical and the Framingham, between the location on Leland Street and there's a ditch that goes down into Coarse Brook. But in this area where we're talking about in Sherborn, the contaminants you're going to encounter are going to be dissolved and probably very, very low. So your chances of carrying them down are fairly remote, and we also, there's casing techniques to case the well off, and again, if you believe fracking is safe, that's what the fracking industry is doing.
Well,
I'm just saying.
I'm glad you brought that up, because let me ask you a question. Here's a hypothetical.
They say it can be done safely. Some people in New York wouldn't agree with that.
Here's a hypothetical. I live on Meadowbrook, which I don't. My well goes bad. Or I just got a permit to drill a well. My well installer shows up. He drills down, he gets to 350 feet, he finds some water, he says, hey, I got to frack it. Nobody knows that he's about to frack it. Right? He fracks it. Is anyone testing the neighbor's well to find out you just opened a fissure and just took all that stuff that's fallen out of the aqueduct right in their backyard into their well? Nobody's watching that.
That's right, yeah.
So what you don't know can get worse just because the well driller showed up and fracked somebody's well in the neighborhood.
And actually, interestingly, and I don't do water well. I'm looking for toxic stuff. I'm not looking for clean water.
Right.
So but having worked at the health department now for 4 years, all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, these drillers are actually, if it's not enough water, they frack
and they're on their own.
And they
don't tell the town they're going to do it.
The Wild West out there, or kind of in that world.
I was getting to an important point. It's important that we somehow try to connect the dots between the two sites, because if some of these wells do go bad, if we can blame General Chemical, they pick up the tab.
Right. And that's where I think we need to, somebody needs to take a leadership role. I'm not sure why the Board of Health has never done that.
So I don't think we want wells.
Can I just ask a question? There's contamination in the aqueduct.
There is contamination flowing down the aqueduct.
There's contaminated
yes.
sediment. Why are they not removing that sediment? I would think that'd be the first thing you'd ask them to do. That's the stuff that's going to spread furthest into Sherborn because
and that's what I was going to bring up. We have a pipeline connecting the site with our brook. So while we can't stop the brook, why can't we call either them or MWRA and say, shut that thing? Because we don't know how fast
it is close. There's nothing.
It leaks. We know it leaks, though.
Right.
Grout fill it. I don't care. Do something with it.
It leaks in. It's a brick thing, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's not ours.
Right.
It just happens to be on our property.
But if it's concentrated in there because there's actual sediment, why are they not cleaning that out? I mean, has that something anybody's asked them to do?
There's water with dissolved chemicals coming out at a drain.
Flowing into it.
I don't remember
water flowing into it.
Pardon me?
There's water flowing into it and there's water flowing out of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the water flowing in is from the site.
Yeah.
Right, so it's infiltration all down along the aqueduct. It's bricks. I mean, it's a really old aqueduct. It's an emergency aqueduct, which, you know, is written in here. Nobody's ever going to use this except for the time when the Western Aqueduct did break, and we actually did use it about, I don't know, 8 years ago. But I think the thing I'd point out, and I don't remember the concentrations in the aqueduct in Sherborn, they were relatively, I wouldn't say they were screamingly high. I would call them, I was surprised I wasn't actually surprised to see them in there, but they were like in the 30s, 40s, 50. Now this is, again, a drinking water number is about 5 for you know, PCE or TCE, one of the two of the compounds. So 30s, you know, a little bit high in relation to it, but then I thought that does it diminish as it goes down the aqueduct? Because it's going to dilute because you're having clean groundwater into the aqueduct.
What month did you test?
Well,
I mean, you don't know how fast the flow is in March.
Right. And we had to really, really fight and push to get the testing in the aqueduct alone. I mean, we really had to make a case for that. Right. So these are, you know, big picture items that, you know, and you kind of want to just say, why don't we just plug this, or why don't we just seal this, or, you know, you have, everybody has like really good ideas of about what can get done, but it's a kind of slow, methodical, plodding process, which is extremely frustrating to everybody. You kind of have to be in it a little bit for the long haul, too. I mean, I hate to
You've got to go through these
disappoint.
phases where we're now trying to, the current phase is define the risk, and we said that you haven't defined the risk correctly. And until they do that, they can't start trying to decide how much they should try to clean it up.
Now, if it looks like it's an ongoing source, it's a significant number, it would discharge a significant amount to the brook or to the nearby ground, then that would be reason to go and take an immediate action or something like that. My thought is that DEP will probably say, well, it's only about 30 in the actual aqueduct, so by the time it leaks out, it's going to get diluted, it'll get down to 5, and then by the time it got to someone's well, it would be not detectable. That's my instinct is what they'll probably tell you.
But DEP doesn't consider the exposure in the aqueduct to be a release? That's fine if you're talking about a subsurface migration, but not if you're talking about within a facility, an aqueduct.
So here's an interesting thing. When we have to think about cleanup goals. What's the cleanup goal? It's based on who's exposed and who's drinking the water. So in the actual groundwater in your general chemical, we're using, you know, we're on MWRA, so we're not drinking the groundwater from that area. But so they're not going to have to meet drinking water standards. I keep pointing out the water in the aqueduct, you'd think the water in the aqueduct is a drinking water, and you'd have to meet drinking water standards when you get contaminated water going into it, right? But actually, I think they've written back to me, and they specifically said we're not going to consider the water in that aqueduct to have to meet drinking water standards.
Even though they're using it as an emergency backup. I mean, that is...
Well, it'll flush out.
Yeah, they would say that there'd be such a volume of water coming through, it actually technically would, but...
Imagine the mud it's going to pick up on the way in.
But you have a real case to make, because if the groundwater from Framingham, which is not being used as a drinking water supply, goes into Sherborn and affects the water there, you want it to meet drinking water standards because you have the private wells, whether or not they're affected.
This is why, I mean, I agree with what you said about not forcing people to have tests. You know, we've got to be sensitive to all that. But Framingham has different needs in this scenario than Sherborn does, and ours are absolutely strategic here. I mean,
so we've raised the issue generally.
If our drinking water goes bad, this Well, we all know what happens. And,
I mean,
and so
the
I just-
answer is, are you,
I think,
is somebody going to
aside
bring
from demanding
water down the line?
specific actions, I think we just need to find a way to bring general pressure on General Chemical, which I think is a pretty big company. If I recall, this is
it's pretty big.
It's an offspring of Allied Chemical, the people that
There's
screwed up the
huge
James River
parent
way
company
back when.
resources.
There's plenty of money at General Chemical. And I think between us and the Board of Health and with help of our attorneys, I think we just got to keep...
As far as testing, public...
that we've talked about here. One is, let's put together a meeting with the property owners and get their buy-in for our taking some leadership here. That came from Mike Giammo, and I think it's a good idea, and we ought to do that. And the other suggestion was that we send a letter to DEP reinforcing the letter, the excellent letter that Roger sent, signaling to DEP that it's not just the water commissioner out there. The town in its official capacity is concerned and is backing this. But other than that,
maybe ask them to come visit with us and assure us that they're
they won't
doing
do
everything
that,
possible.
but that's fine.
Well, they were invited but didn't show up, right?
Who is that? Is that are you talking about the DEP? Or you?
Yeah.
Oh, they'll come. No, if you...
She had a conflict.
They will.
She did. She sent an email. She had a
Yeah.
conflict. I need to make another point about...
I had a quick question for Roger. Your action items, the first one was start annual testing of the Sherborn wells.
Yes.
Those are the private, this goes,
Private.
the overlap between the two concerns. Those are the wells that have already been tested?
Well, it'd be nice to do those, but I'm sure if you sent out a survey to all those neighborhoods and said, here's what's going on, would you volunteer to have your wells tested? And I'm sure...
And it would require their approval.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't...
Sorry.
You can't go on their property.
Along those lines...
DEP can.
Yeah, DEP can.
DEP
They can if they really
If you tell
wanted
DEP to
yeah.
monitor those wells and they decide to do it, they can go in and monitor those wells. They don't need the permission. They just do it.
Right.
So I want to make a point on the, at least for this board, at least on a leadership role. I'm not saying we should go around and put a red X on the front door of everyone we're testing, but in the future, the unknown, those people might not say, I don't want the red X on my door. But again, there's the hypothetical that someone has a lot or someone is going to go drill a well. They're going to go file a permit. Board of Health's going to give it to them. Drill it. Show up at the sample a couple weeks later, and that well's no good. And the driller says, well, I can frack it, which we know very well might pull in more contamination at this point, or, I don't know, sue General Chemical yourself. They're going to look to the town and go, what happened? Where was the leadership that, I didn't know this could happen to my house. What am I going to do with it now? I just bought it, the well went bad. I got a new septic and I can't put a well in. What am I going to do? And I think that we, at least as a leadership role, should somewhat try to fight that. Because we know there's an open pipeline that's carrying that stuff into our town. We could put public wells in to start monitoring it on some of the public land. I'm just...
But that's to my mind, this is the DEP's role, is to come in and provide the information that's needed so you can make the judgment that you need. And they actually also always don't have the resources. I want to say that we did have to hire, and TRC is our consultant. We have an excellent hydrogeologist, Drew Smythe. And I don't want to recommend one over the other, but I want to say that he was really instrumental in doing the depth of the really intense hydrogeo arguments about pushing DEP, who are really limited in staff, are going to be more limited after June 30th because I have about, 20% of their staff is retiring. So they're going to be even more limited in what they can do. So, I think if that's another consideration. If you want to have someone come advise you on what your options might be or what are the things you want to push, that's another option that might help.
I think raising the profile with the state and also with US EPA is going to accomplish exactly what you're talking about. Right. And it doesn't need to point the finger at any particular property.
Exactly.
It raises the
I'm not saying we do that.
It raises the public interest, the public health interest of the fact that we drink our groundwater, whereas Framingham doesn't. That was a good point, Carol or whoever made it. And we could put in some of the hypotheticals that you talked about, fracturing wells, People buying houses, not knowing whether it's a contaminated well or not.
Right.
All that stuff. Does somebody want to draft a letter? Do we want to have David draft a letter? How do we do that?
Well, I think there's a consensus here to support what Roger has done so far and to raise our profile. So that
I'll
should-
volunteer to take it on.
I was just saying, I'm happy to do a draft as well. We'll work together either way. Yep.
Good, great.
So let's sort of have the two of them draft something and
Mark,
circulate.
yeah, that's great.
That's excellent.
Can I ask
Could we
another
also
practical
do
question?
reach out to the property owners and have
Yeah, I
them
wish
come
that
in?
had been done before this meeting. I guess we weren't clear enough on that.
Is there already a list that you've compiled of those interested property owners, those 29?
Yes.
And are they on your mail list?
No.
No. Okay.
Is there any point in including EPA in our correspondence? I'm assuming DEP has jurisdiction. I'm asking for
I would
a reason.
include
My son
them.
is clerking at the Environmental Justice Division at EPA this
That's
summer.
the reason. That's why we should do it.
Yeah, that's why we should do it.
Yeah, no, well, here's the thing. EPA has the technical guns to bring into this. And we actually, in the very beginning, when it was in the RECRA program, and it was a joint program that's a state, the corrective action is run by authorized by EPA. Well, actually, it's not authorized by EPA to the state, but they let the state issue the license. But in the cleanup world, for that group, the two have to work together. So when we were having these discussions 4 years ago, I said I knew there were experts on DNAPL, this is the dense non-aqueous phase liquid. I knew there were experts on chlorinated solvents. They're in Ada, Oklahoma. They're fantastic. They know about remediation. They actually weighed in on what we called. We said there were all these data gaps that were going on, and they weighed in on this the problems. And they had I forget how long that 13-page, or it was a significant number of comments, and they helped DEP tell General Chemical, here, fill out the data gaps about what your source area. They didn't even know what was going on in their source area.
Here's the specific ways you should measure this stuff, and then what kinds
Right.
of wells you ought to drill, and the whole
And
technology.
was Sherborn on the radar at that point yet?
Yeah, yep, Roger was there. Roger was there before Carol, BC. He's been there BC.
So our Congresswoman is copied on the Birmingham Board of Health letter.
Yep.
Our state rep and state senator
I
should
think
be
Linsky
copied.
was CC'd on it as well.
Yeah.
I think Catherine Clark, are you Catherine Clark District also? Catherine Clark for U.S.
Yeah, that's our congressperson.
Yeah. So I don't know, we were in very close contact with Kerry. Was it Kerry before? Yeah.
He's no longer our senator.
Right, so,
But let me just say a thing that in another cleanup site in another town, we had DEP working on the site. And so we went to DEP and we said, this is really, we think, beyond your capabilities. And after talking to them, we got them to formally request EPA to designate the site as a Superfund site. And we went through a process with EPA, and then they agreed that there was sufficient risk to the public that it should be a Superfund site. The problem here is I don't see the risk to the public unless you have some evidence that would connect it to the school, in particular, the proximity of the school. But because you're still looking at the site and trying to figure out what the risk is, there is the potential here of asking EPA to take it over as a Superfund site. And they have significantly more powers, particularly for dealing with a national corporation who's got offices all over the United States. You want an administrative consent order that's going to, the EPA will get, that's truly going to be funded with some big bucks. And given what you've said, it looks like the $1.8 million that they're talking about isn't going to approach this thing at all.
well, yeah, I'll leave, maybe you should talk to DEP or somebody else about the relative merits of making something a Superfund site. To me, it's kind of just a name. I don't know logistically how they do that. They have an administrative consent order already in place with DEP that I think EPA did weigh in on and had some requirements for. So it probably would be, it'd be a programmatic shift. And sometimes, I have to tell you, to confess to you, that sometimes a Superfund process can slow things down, if that's possible, even more. So I'm not sure what that would gain you. I mean, I think we have the right people working on it at DEP. I do think that any extra oomph that you can get in terms of, we would like some answers, we have concerns, the more that are asking, the more attention you get. And I think that DEP is really capable and could always get EPA's technical assistance, which is really what you're going for. Not necessarily, I mean, you might, in the end, you're right, you might need the hammer that they have that they could bring to bear too. But DEP could do that if they also wanted to, but they'd have to, I'm sure they'd have to look at the technical merits and the legal merits of doing that, so.
Has anybody talked with the MWRA to try to get them to stick up for themselves?
Yeah, they show up at these meetings occasionally and say, well, you know, we don't use that pipe, so we don't much care.
Well, they would care probably if they were a source, right? I mean,
you know, that's a good point. I have to say that we're pretty stretched thin in what we're doing. We have a significant number of problems that are coming down the pike or on our table right now. So I have to say, you know, I have had to put aside General Chemical for a little bit. I can't even, you know, even to deploy the consultant, I need resources to do that. So we're stretched thin in that respect, and I think, you know, if somebody else would go to MWRA, or if, you know, any calls to anybody, I think really help, you know. And if they want to use me as a resource, or they want to talk to our consultant as a resource, it's better to talk to someone who's already up to speed, and it will help you get your understanding.
The MWRA is involved, because in order to test the aqueduct, they have to go to get their permission, and MWRA people go with them when it's done.
No,
I'm not sure they're really, you know, actually, it's interesting, now that you say that, I don't really know if they really got a grip on what all's going on.
If they were thinking about it, they would realize that if they've got water coming into their pipe and it's pulling contamination, even if they didn't generate the contamination, and then it's dispersing it in somebody else's property, they've got a problem.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sure they would want to solve that problem.
It's now on record that that's happening, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's not. We didn't just make that up.
We didn't make it up, right?
It's on record that
and we had a pool. We actually, they had sampling back as far as like I think it was the 80s or the 90s, right, when they first started finding that. And we had, like I said, really push to get this new recent data. Well, now it's, you know, a year old or whatever, but they hadn't done anything for probably 10 years. And even the sediment and the surface water sampling in Coarse Brook, we were really pushing for that. And the numbers we're seeing in the surface water, remember I said, when this stuff surfaces, when it daylights, it likes to go in the air. So for us to see concentrations in the surface water that far away in Coarse Brook, we have a mother lode, really, that's happening further upstream. And so, you know, I think we're the ones that also pointed out, you know, I'm sorry to say it, but you've got to go down the brook and you've got to look at things like irrigation ponds and every step along the way and trace it out and not just stay on the surface, but, you know, continue stepping out.
What about Natick? Coarse Brook feeds Lake Cochituate. What are they doing about this?
You know, we haven't talked to Natick. In here it says Natick has no private wells, so there's no problem.
But they live off of their own wells.
That's not the worst thing in Natick.
It won't be the worst thing in the mud of Lake Cochituate. The other side's got a Superfund site, right?
Yeah.
The Army, the Natick Army Labs, yeah.
Well, the lab and, didn't they have a mercury spill, Alex, on the other side, on the Sudbury River side?
Are you talking about Niantic or PCBs?
Yeah. Riverside.
What's that?
It's all Sudbury Riverside.
Right.
But the wells, the test wells and everything else, that they use the aqueduct of the dam, you might want to check the brook. Sunshine Farm uses surface water for irrigation, so who knows?
Right.
And they haven't paid a lot of attention to what goes on right there.
Spill, that was 55 gallons.
PCBs.
PCBs?
So what?
But it's still a plume,
So
right?
we've got an action plan, I think.
At what level does this become hazardous waste?
It was hazardous waste when it went into the ground.
Right, but at what point when it comes out?
Well, the soil is hazardous if they were to dig it up.
And I thought I read in here somewhere there was a potential that they start having to pump out basements or something that.
Well, if they had to pump water
could
out,
be hazardous
the
waste.
water would be hazardous
Oh,
waste.
yeah, because it It's a regulatory thing. So if it goes down as a listed hazardous waste.
You mentioned the mixture rule.
Yeah, if it goes down as a hazardous waste, when you start pumping it up, you're treating a hazardous waste. So you're kind of getting into the RCRA whole, treatment issues.
But also, if you dilute it, you've just created a mixture, but you still have hazardous waste.
Right.
I think that's the other thing you had.
Once a hazardous waste, always a hazardous waste, really.
Unless it's treated.
All right, I got one more practical question.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, and it's in here, something about the well at the car wash.
Mm-hmm.
You said it was how deep?
Is that 300?
300 feet.
Something
All right,
like
and
that.
it's drawing probably quite a bit of water. So
Occasionally, yeah.
not even a scientist can figure out that it's pulling the contamination down into the aquifer.
Right. Oh, yeah, and they can see
Wouldn't a simple solution be, and I think General Chemical should pay for this, shut that well off and put them on MWRA water and stop doing that?
Right.
Because we don't know where it's going to go after they suck it down.
Well, and actually, we actually had a comment in there, I believe, that we think there actually might be a slightly northerly flow to some of the contamination. It's not going to be, most of it really is clearly
Well, that's to the north,
south,
is it not?
right? Right, and it would be in the rock. So, yeah, you're right, it could, move it around a little bit in the rock, at that level in the rock. But that's the only thing in that area that would get affected. It's not going to...
Similar thing to think about, that your neighborhood and that whole area draws about 20,000 gallons per day out of that aquifer.
In Meadowbrook and stuff.
Yeah. So it's sucking 20,000 gallons a day out of the...
It's further away, though.
When they test the water, it still comes down below drinking water limits, so everybody walks, oh, well, it's okay. So it's within acceptable drinking.
Well,
So
it's funny because our drinking water limit is what?
0.
On
5.
VOCs?
0.
0. So it's not actually below our limit. It's below DEP. Which is
Oh.
why it's really tough
But
to get a well if you're on that side of town right now. If you had to drill a well, you would not pass.
You don't go on the detection limit?
Nope.
So how do you can't possibly test it properly, can you? How do you test it?
That's an interesting question.
I mean, you can't, the lab will only go down to like 0.5, let's say, or 0.2
And we
parts per
don't
billion.
allow that.
And all you can say is, I don't know if there's anything between 0 and 0.2. You just don't know.
Again, that's my point. You couldn't
Probably go- they
possibly
probably
drill a
go-
well on Meadowbrook and pass right now.
Right.
If you
Yeah, I
lived
think-
on that road, you could not drill
Unless
a
you
well.
went to a bad lab that had a higher detection.
Well, you could do that, right. Or just leave it out for a day and it'll clear out.
And one other point I wanted to make clear for the record, just that the school, we've done tons of monitoring around the school, in the school, soil gas, soil, water, and we have a monitoring program to make sure that the school isn't impacted. So we've got the school, the Woodrow Wilson School next to the site really well identified, and we've done a lot of work with the community to make them feel that it's safe to be there and not a problem. And that's a difficult message, even though you have this major problem sitting in the ground, subsurface, right next to them, and then daylighting up at the brook that's nearby. So I just want to, if people are concerned, because I did talk about the school, I just want to make that clear.
With the school, are you testing above that vapor barrier or below the vapor barrier?
The DEP came in actually a few years ago and put those soil gas points in, I remember, right up by the basketball, right outside the gym.
Oh.
And so there's not only a groundwater monitoring well, which is kind of a sentinel well for us, so and that's pretty much been non-detected or really low. If we had numbers up in the 50 or 100 range, that would drive us to do indoor air, but the numbers in the well have been really low, and DEP had done the soil gas testing just outside the building.
Oh.
So I was going off of that, so.
Well, thank you for coming in. This was a great discussion, and
Yeah, feel
you
free
know,
to contact us.
I was going to say, if possible, maybe we'll have you back in a few months after, more stuff has happened, and you can give us an update, or...
Yeah, we'll probably get an update on this
Right. I would
report
think,
in 2 months.
Well, when DEP
Backwater?
issues its rulings on the comprehensive site assessment,
when they get
should
out to
be-
give this comment response back, I think that's a good point. And the other thing just occurred to me is we have them on a semi-annual groundwater monitoring program no matter what. Things don't start and stop. We're like, you want to keep this going. You could petition to have them do some kind of, maybe it's not the homeowners' wells, but maybe they install some sentinel wells.
Yeah, right at the Right at the line where they say all the contamination stops, right at the town line, where it's supposed to
You need to have
stop.
that regular data set over seasonal
A
variation.
foot over the line, Roger, what do you think?
Well, ironically, they put in 2 new test wells right at the exit from the MWRA pipe.
Yeah.
6 feet deep or something like that. Nothing.
Sure. All right, so we have an action plan, and thanks to everybody for the great ideas. The action plan is Chuck and Mark will draft a letter, and I guess it'll be circulated before the next meeting.
And it would probably be a good idea, as Mark suggested, to have Roger and Carol take a look at the letter.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't mind taking a look at our letter before we send it out.
Yeah, I think
My letter?
we've got that.
We have it.
We have all your stuff.
We know everything about you.
And the
Right,
other-
is the thought this letter is going to go back through for the board to approve next meeting? Is that-
Yes.
Yes.
But
okay.
the other part of the action plan is to, let's reach out to the property owners, bring them up to date, and make sure they're on board with the plan here to ask for additional state-funded testing of.
Well, I mean, maybe that's the next step after this. I mean, I don't think this letter specifically would ask for
We'll
the
shoot
additional
if the-
testing, but
The next meeting is...
It's already asked for
in Roger's letter.
Roger's letter, yeah.
If the next meeting is the 8th, we may have to shoot for the one after that, just to get all
Okay,
the input.
that's
on it.
fine.
But
Yeah.
we'll do our best.
That's fine. This stuff's not going anywhere. Or it is.
Well.
Somewhere. Okay, good. Let's get on to the next item. I'm wondering if the board would mind if we took the liquor license out of order, because that's apt to be a shorter discussion, I would think. And is anybody there, is that okay with everybody? Okay.
Sure.
Is anybody there for the liquor license, the one-day liquor license? Oh, you sat through a long meeting for this.
Should have brought something to drink. Like, hey.
Okay. All right, so this is a request. David, maybe you could describe what we're doing here?
Yeah, basically, this is a one-day liquor license. The event is being held at the community center on July 4th, and as you know, we circulated around to various town officials to sign off on those applications when they come through, and we had a sign-off from the fire chief and a requirement or a condition from the police chief that there be a police detail.
Is that in writing? Because I don't even see any mark here on the police department.
No, I don't see anything on there. It was just, the chief conveyed it to me.
Okay.
And I don't know if,
Can we find out what the event is before we get into a discussion?
We're getting married.
Getting married?
Yeah, we-
Congratulations.
Yeah, we are getting married. We have 40 guests.
40?
Yeah, it's a very small party, so.
So yeah.
What time?
We're looking
we
to
are
kick
one-
off 4:30.
4:30, yeah.
I guess arrived at 4:30.
Okay.
So I think we'll
So
probably
it's-
stay till 10.
it's a 5.5-hour event. The details run 4 hours and 4 hours.
Yeah, I was just concerned with the July 4th being.
Right, and I think
if it was the morning, that wouldn't really.
The community center directed, I think the community center directed you to speak to the police department about the detail.
Yeah, they directed us here, just in...
They asked us to come here, yeah.
The community center directed you here?
No, well, we talked to the town clerk last week, and then they said it was going to be part of the agenda on this meeting, which would be discussed, and we could...
That the permit would be?
Yeah.
But nobody from the community center directed you to speak to the police department about the details?
Nope.
So, the police chief hasn't signed off on this?
No,
the
he was
police
here
chief-
earlier, but...
But there's been a long history of discussion about the need for police details for events at the community center, and I think I've been pretty clear that for small weddings that are private, I don't see a need for police detail. To require a police detail requires the highest possible requirement because it's a private event. It's open only to your guests. It's not for general public. So it's a private party, and so you run into the situation of setting a precedent that every private event in Sherborn on private property would have to have a police detail. The community center was privatized by the town leasing it to a private entity to operate the community center, and that's the foundation. that has renovated the building and has independent finances and independent management and the like. And therefore, I have consistently not supported the imposition of police details on small private parties. And we did a survey of other communities, and usually the break point is like 100 people. This is a really small gathering. So unless there's been some history of rowdiness by the particular group, I don't know that. I mean, the police chief, if he was here, I would ask him why he felt there was a need for this particular.
Yeah, they told us that that was supposed to be for parties of 100 people and over, so that's what we really didn't count with that. We live like an hour driving from here, so we came because, you know, it was a cheaper option for us, and this is like more than 50% of what we are paying for the venue. So
the police chief had to leave unexpectedly.
Was there a reason though, David, for I think the question?
Well, basically, the one event that it all goes back to that started the whole problem a couple of years ago was a 4th of July wedding event. So
how many people?
I don't think it was that big. It was 50 to 100, something like that. But
and that event, well, the thing that he cites was that somebody from that event later, after the event was over, set off fireworks on the 4th of July at the Gandhi statue, not even on the site, and therefore felt it was somehow related to the venue, and therefore what that has to do with these poor people, because they weren't there at that wedding, is beyond me.
I think his point was more than that, Paul. We don't have to debate the facts of that, but I think the point there was such a level of inebriation that he thought that having an officer there, so people didn't get into their cars, et cetera, would be a problem. But you're right. That has nothing to do with these people here. I'll agree with you on that much.
But if that's a concern,
go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. If that's a concern, there's nothing stopping the police from stopping by and checking on.
Oh, they want to get paid.
No, I understand. But
that's the issue.
They could also do that, could they not?
Yes.
They could. It's 4th of July. There's probably other things they're going to be doing too, but yeah, sure.
The fee here, because it's 5 hours, is going to be 8 hours.
Right.
It's two.
That's right.
And so that's the community center, in order to survive, has got to have some private parties. And having that kind of fee imposed on top of the other fees makes it non-competitive in the wedding market, if you will. And we as a community benefit from private funds from out of town being used to pay for private events at the community center because it helps maintain the building. If we didn't privatize the building and have a foundation operating it, it would default to the town, and we'd have to pick up all those expenses.
We do get $1 a year of rent.
Can I make 2 points of why I'm really uncomfortable with this conversation? One, it wasn't on the agenda. Two, actually, I'm going to make 3 points. No, it wasn't, because you're discussing whether or not there's a need for a police detail. You had this discussion 6 months ago. It was pretty heated. I thought you set precedents because there was 2 other parties. Each liquor license you've signed off since then for the community center has had police detail. The police chief just left. We could have had this discussion with him here. He's not here. He hasn't signed off on this. Neither is the fire chief.
Well, Tim signed off. His name's right on there.
All right, it's not on
You got the
mine.
wrong one. Here.
Okay.
He signed off on this one.
Did the police chief?
The chief signed off.
It was brought to us not 10 minutes ago that they were spoken to the police chief and they're going to hire a detail, I thought that was said. We're having the argument.
I think David said he spoke to Rick.
In the notes here, I said police chief and town administrator did not recommend a waiver of detail for this event. And that was after speaking to the community center and the police chief. So he may not have signed on that yet, but that was his condition. He recommended not waiving the police detail, which therefore means the condition he would place on that one-day liquor license is to require a detail.
Okay. And I thought it was agreed upon that if there was going to be alcohol served in a town building, there'd be a police detail. I thought that was what was agreed on about 6 months ago.
Basically, what's
Never agreed to by me.
what has been, how it's been operating is that the chief can make the call on that. So it's basically, there are a lot of variables that go into it. It's the kind of event, the number of people going to the event, the duration of the event. He uses all those things before he makes up his mind on. He doesn't just say, okay, it's a wedding, boom, there's a detail.
Sean, I don't think there was a vote on anything other than particular events. I
was here for that meeting, and it was a vote on 2 specific events.
Yeah.
There's also clearly a broader issue in terms of communication between the foundation board and the police chief, which was sort of overlaid.
some of which has happened since then. I mean, they've had
Right.
some discussions. I think you were a facilitator on some of that.
Right.
Even before you were a selectman. That doesn't answer the question about this particular application. I mean, I would say ordinarily I would be comfortable with a 40-person party not having a detail, but where the chief, for some reason, has specifically asked for it, and he's not here to explain why, I'm kind of at a loss, personally, to know what he's thinking.
Well, he did speak with the community center. I think the difference between this event and the last one, where there was a lot of confusion, is at that time the community center was arguing on behalf of their client or their customer that there shouldn't be a detail. In this one, the community center contacted the police department. I spoke to the community center as we agreed that that's how we're going to have the process. And then I think the community center must have conveyed to the customer, this is what is required, that there's going to be a detail required. Your appeal process is to go to the Board of Selectmen to request a waiver for that. So I think that's how it was down, but we don't have, the difference between this conversation and the last one is the community center has accepted the police
Can we put this off?
passing that on.
We don't have a meeting before July 4th.
Oh.
We don't.
To hear from Rick.
The other thing I'm wondering is alcohol being served for 5.5 hours?
Well, we're planning on having the ceremony there as well.
Well, I'm wondering if it was a 4-hour alcohol service, then you'd only need one detail. That would cut the detail cost in half.
Theoretically.
Why wouldn't you?
Because that runs into a union issue, and we've been trying to work through that.
What's the union issue?
The union issue is that the details have a right to the event. So if their event is 4 hours, that's one thing, but if their event is 7 hours and they're only doing alcohol for 3 hours, you'd have to have a special agreement with the union or the person working that detail that they don't have a right to be at the whole detail.
To vote for no
but
detail,
that's
then.
but that's a separate.
I mean, if that's the rule, then I'm not going to vote for a detail. That's a ridiculous rule. So
I don't see that rule anywhere. It's not like written in the contract or anything. But I'm saying how it works.
I mean,
Yeah.
That's a holdup, and that's not something that I think we.
Well, in the past, I think the chief has been able to work out some of those things when that's come up.
I don't think there's any reason to believe these people are going to be, this party's going to, there's no probable cause to believe there's going to be any rowdiness at this wedding.
Well, we never know. I mean, do we have a consensus here of any kind?
Well, I move to grant the one-day liquor license without the police detail.
Second.
Any further discussion on this?
No, I wish the chief were here to give us his reasons. Like you, I'm caught between, the group of 40 seems awfully small, so I agree with this approach.
Okay. All right. Sean?
I completely disagree with overruling the chief.
Okay. All in favor of Paul's motion? Right. Opposed? Okay. All right. And I'll say I would not have voted yes, except I don't have any direct input from the chief. And I had this concern about what you just said, which is the right to the event issue, because I think we could have helped save these folks some cost otherwise. So.
Well, it's something that is, it's an issue of bargaining.
All right, well,
that's what details are. It's right in the contract. So.
No, understood.
Yeah,
but
right.
I mean, it defeats if the chief's purpose is to have a detail for protection, that kind of defeats the purpose because it makes it an untenable expense for a 5-hour ceremony or whatever.
Right, and I think were able to work something out on a certain window in one of the events to do that, but I can't guarantee that that's going to be worked out in a week and a half.
Understood. And that's why I voted the way I did.
It's a shame these have to come through
At the last
a week
minute like this.
before
Yeah, I agree with that too.
an event. I mean, we could have had this discussion, tabled it.
David, can we ask this community center to put these things in
Well,
at
well,
least
hold it.
30 days ahead of time?
The
or whatever
community
it is?
center said this was very late notice.
Yeah, we
Okay.
pushed it too fast, so I was...
Oh, you were at the
Understood.
last
All
one?
right.
Okay,
We were
fine.
looking around for...
All right, good. Well, enjoy your wedding. I hope it's a great day.
Consider the vote.
Thanks very much.
Okay. All right, now we have discussion of
Good luck with your
2016
marriage.
With the marriage? Just the wedding.
And your wedding.
That sounded so pessimistic, Paul.
And we hope you have a good life.
Good luck.
Oh, boy. Okay, we're getting slappy. Discussion of fiscal year 2016 town council contract.
Right, I'm recused on this, so I'm
Okay.
gonna step aside.
Barbara? Hi, Barbara.
I'll just preface it that each year we have town council come in to re-up their contract for the following year. Each year we kind of budget with a little bit of an increase, or we've worked something out with council not to increase. So the amount that is requested by Petrini and Associates for next year is $75,000, which is an increase of 15. We had anticipated an increase of 10, and that's what we had budgeted because they had held their rates steady for the last 2 years. I think that's what.
No, actually, we're requesting 70,000, not 75.
Okay, it's still a $15,000 increase, but it's not 75, it's 70,000, yeah. And we budgeted a $10,000 increase, and they're requesting a $15,000 increase. But the rates had been steady under the last agreement for
Yes.
that flat at 55,000.
So, David, I'm the only one who's on the board from last year in terms of this contract, and I voted the last time to continue with Petrini. But I do think that since we have a new board with more people, we ought to at least be open in terms of the process and get the sense of what the board wants to do as far as a process. I mean, I'd be happy to entertain simply carrying through Petrini as the contractor. I also think some people may see some value in going out to market, or at least considering other alternatives, and we should talk about the process first before we get into a particular discussion of amount in particular contract, if that's okay?
Yeah,
and I would also preface that by saying I've been very happy with Petrini and particularly with Barbara as town council. I think she's done great service for us, and you know, we've benefited from her wisdom on a lot of different issues, and I haven't always been as happy with some of the other folks who have had to help us on particular issues, but we've had those discussions. But I think in terms of the main council services, I think we've been very well served. But I do think, again, it's healthy to have a discussion of opening it up.
I mean, the proposal was they issued the proposal back in March, I think, and we purposely had held it so that there would be a new board that could review to see if they were comfortable re-upping, and see after a year if they were content with the council, or if they wanted to go out and survey other councils. We just anticipated that everybody would have some different ideas, so that's what we're looking to find out from the board.
So I guess my first question would be, before we get into money, are there any other changes to the agreement from the previous one?
No, it's just the, nothing's changed in the retainer or anything. It's just the amount.
Yeah, I've functioned as in-house counsel, general counsel for a number of years, hiring, negotiating retention agreements with council. I think it's a very good idea periodically, maybe not every year, but every 3 years, every 5 years, to put it out to bid, even if you're happy with the work that's being provided. I think it's a good idea to reconsider it. And with the larger board, I'd be happy to take that on, and I would suggest opening it up for bid. have some comments about the specific proposal and the dollar amount, but I also just think it's beneficial to open it up to bid.
So what would you suggest? Would you suggest literally going out to market, or would you suggest identifying a couple of firms to talk to, or one firm, or three firms, or?
I wouldn't go out to the open market. I would typically solicit 2, 3, 4 firms that I think I value their work and would be happy to have them serve as town council.
The process is, the selection of town council is exempt from the procurement laws, so you don't have to go out to bid. You can solicit responses from anyone that you're willing to do business with. And you don't have, it's not a, you have to go with the lowest bidder thing, you know, yeah.
Did you say you don't have to?
You don't have to go with the lowest bidder on that.
Any thoughts on this one?
Not really, other than one critique. The contract's dated July 1st, or at least the draft. It's got Peter Caruso, and it does not have the 3 newest
I think
members
that's
of
the
the board.
2012
So
contract.
that would have been a tough one to sign.
No, this is dated July 1st, 2015.
Oh, it is?
It was sent out on March.
Right.
In March of 2015, so that's why it has Mr. Caruso's name.
All right.
Because we didn't know.
That makes sense.
Who was going to be on the board.
And we weren't asking for a signature on tonight. It was listed as a discussion.
Right. All right, so there's kind of 2 things we would have to do. One, I guess, is to authorize, unless I'm wrong about this, we would authorize town council to continue for, if they're willing to do it, for an indefinite period of time after July 1 until we'd finished whatever process Chuck has suggested here. And then 2, we would have to figure out what the process would be. And you know, one thought is to have a subcommittee which would look at town council.
It's not the biggest expenditure in our budget, but it's substantial enough that I think, you know, it's always a good idea to consider alternatives.
Yeah, and in different places have different expertises and different levels of attention. I mean, one thing I really liked about Petrini is we get Barbara's personal attention as much as possible. She's over here a lot. And,
several times a week.
And that's not always the case, depending on what firm you have as town council. Sometimes there's a lot of back and forth.
Right.
So.
Yeah, particularly some of the bigger firms where this.
I mean, you know, I would be happy to serve on a subcommittee with Chuck to look at this issue and report back to the board for a decision if people wanted that as a process.
Would you also be authorizing that subcommittee to work out some sort of interim agreement? Or
yeah, I mean, I guess we should ask Barbara, are you able to do an interim agreement?
Well, first of all, good evening. And congratulations to our new members. So if, what we'd certainly be willing to do is to stay on at our regular hourly rate after July 1st, if you want us to stay on. But we would not be willing to stay on at the $55,000 retainer after July 1st. So on an hourly basis, that's fine.
I don't think we're asking her to do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would think it would be an hourly basis, David.
So we would continue on the hourly basis that's in the existing contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think we have that.
Or are you saying the hourly rate in your proposed?
Right, but the hourly rate that since we were asking for an increase in the retainer, we did not ask for an increase in the hourly rates.
Oh, okay.
So they're actually the same as this year.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea would be after a month or 2, we know what we
And I'm sure
doing.
there's a
Sign contract with
time
them,
limitation that
contract with somebody else.
you're comfortable
Yeah.
with.
I mean, if that's what you wanted, I have no opinion.
Yeah, no, I think Chuck's the guy with the most experience here, but I think what he said makes a lot of sense, and we've got a new board. We should, all be vested in whatever decision is made.
Certainly. Well, it's going to be the 4 of us, right?
Right.
Paul's recused
yeah,
from this one, right? And if you guys set up a subcommittee, then the time for any input would be now. Right? You can't solicit input from the rest of us.
I see what you're saying, in terms of your thoughts on how the subcommittee should proceed and what we should do. We're not going to sign anything, we would bring back
No, I understand.
a
Just in terms
recommendation.
of my take on this.
Yeah.
Would be, I think Chuck is correct. It's always good to go out and look. I would just say, from my experience on advisory and from observing Barbara at town meeting, that I would be very comfortable re-signing the training, but I am uncomfortable with the level of increase. I mean, the level of increase.
Oh, I couldn't hear you. Thank you.
We're in a, our revenues are going up 3% a year, and I have the same issue in my business when people come in, and we're not getting those kinds of price increases, and so I would, that's a problem for me. But other than that, I would be very happy to work with Petrini Associates again.
Yeah, and obviously the other part of the legal expense that is probably the greater exposure is litigation costs.
Right.
Monitoring that going forward, because I'm assuming there have been a number of years where they've exceeded the retainer amount.
I'm not sure the litigation is covered directly under the retainer either.
Yeah, I'm saying it's another legal fee issue that's not related to this retention agreement.
Okay.
Well, but it's related in that this agreement binds you to use them. Right.
Well, no, we could go out we can hire whoever we want as specialized counsel for certain things. We've had other counsel and other consultants come in on different issues, yeah. Yeah, we've hired investigators, we've hired separate labor counsel for other things. Yes, yeah.
So, and your intent in doing this is to look for better service or lower cost?
Either or both. That's it. Just
it's not a presumption either.
Yeah, my concern is always that when you've been working with the same law firm for 4 or 5 years, it becomes you don't want there to be a perception that you're locked in, and it's just always worth exploring what the alternatives are. I just think it's sound business practice.
Yeah, and my thought is there's no, I don't feel a presumption either way. I don't feel like this process is going to necessarily result in a change. But I do think that the public expects us, as Sean was talking about, showing leadership on other issues. I think that the public expects us at least to look at these things periodically and make decisions.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just
but there's certainly no presumption. Right. At least from my standpoint, that we're going to go any other direction. So, okay.
Well, actually, I mean, the reality is the incumbent is pretty far up the knowledge curve. I think an inherent advantage, but it's still worth exploring.
Okay, good. All right, so Chuck will plan to report back in maybe the second meeting in July. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, good.
So can I just, since I'm here,
please go ahead, Barbara. Yeah, no, please do.
just say a few words in response. So, first of all, I realize that we're asking for a large increase, and there's 2 reasons for that. First of all, we've been town council since 2010, and in that time, we've had 1 increase in the retainer. So, it may seem like we're asking for a big jump. It's only because we've had so little in the past. Because we're cognizant of the fact that towns, have limited resources, and we represent towns. That's what we do. So we are aware of that. But the second thing is that the idea of the fixed fee retainer is to provide protection to the town for your sort of run-of-the-mill, ordinary types of legal expenses. Litigation is outside the retainer. Certain other things are outside the retainer. And the idea is to try to come up with a number that is roughly proportional to the level of services that you require, while at the same time, not overtaxing your budget. And we've just simply found that historically this town tends to use a lot of legal resources under the retainer. So we've ended up having, to waive a lot of fees, which is part of the deal. We understand that. But it's, at some point, we just feel that we need to get some sort of increase to make it a little bit more equitable. We understand that we're still going to end up waiving some money at the end of the year, but we'd like to not leave quite so much on the table. We think we've been really reasonable with our fees. We've given, we think, really great service to the town. We're right next door, close by. Whenever you need us, we're here. And we're not a large firm. So you do get the personal attention, and we don't have a ton of towns, so I don't have to look up your names. I know who people are in town. You know, that's not always the case. So, you know, I perfectly respect the fact that, you know, you want to look at these things periodically, and frankly, I'm quite confident that when you look at other firms, you'll see that Petrini and Associates is, in fact, you know, a great municipal law firm. We're right at the top of the field, and we'd love to stay on if it works out that way. But, you know, I don't want you to think that we're trying to, you know, suddenly jack up the rates. Just simply it's really been a long period of time that we haven't really had much of an increase. So that's why it seems like a lot in 1 year. And obviously we're hoping that we'll be one of the firms that you will put on your list that, you know, can submit a proposal. And, you know, everything's subject to negotiation. So look forward to working with you and see what happens.
In Mark and Sean and Chuck, just, I mean, to give you an example without naming names or specifics, but Barbara gets called in on any number of, or Petrini, on any number of issues kind of behind the scenes where somebody asks David a question that has a legal implication, makes a threat against the town that has a legal implication, raises a procedural question, and David, because of the retainer agreement, can call town council and ask those questions. And one of the things that came up fairly recently, and I don't know if it circulated to the whole board, but there was a question where certain, I would say a board member had gone to use town council, and there's really a process where they should go through, and Barbara respects that process, and David controls that process. And so David has reiterated to the different boards that they have to go through him requesting the right to use town council.
Yeah, in the past that's varied whether or not the town has followed that, which is
and we need to follow, because when you're talking about controlling costs, that's how you control costs.
I just wanted to point out it wasn't a board member.
I didn't mean a board member here. I meant a member of a board in town. Right. Yeah. I just didn't want to give any details. No, I didn't want to give any details. It was a member of another board in town. And I mean, I'm sure with good reason. And there have been other town officers who've gone to town council, and sometimes it's not necessary to do it, and sometimes it is, and David can make that call.
Yeah.
So, anything else? Thanks, Barbara. Thanks for sitting through.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, why not?
On a different subject.
But she's on the hourly rate now.
I'll be quick. On the general chemical thing, are you personally the attorney that's working with Framingham on this?
No, I am not. I am not working on this for Framingham. No.
And if we decided to ramp up our efforts here, would that be a conflict?
Well, it's potentially a conflict. In fact, this came up a year or two ago, and we consulted with this board and with the Board of Selectmen in Framingham to see, you know, whether people were comfortable with that. And I think this board at that time determined that they would prefer to have, if they're going to have counsel, to get a separate counsel at that point, because we have been representing Framingham, you know, in that respect. So if this board decides they want to do that, you could always revisit that. But I think at the time we sort of all came to a consensus that it seemed to make more sense that if you were going to do that, that you might want to have separate counsel because of any potential
That was
conflict.
at least 2 years ago, because I wasn't part of that discussion.
Yeah, it was.
Revisit that.
Yeah.
It was, but the reason was that the needs are varying. Framingham's needs are much different from Sherborn.
But we'd still have to discuss whether that's a conflict or not.
But you also could waive it until the point where you think there is a direct conflict.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But I think the consensus at the time was not to use Petrini and Associates, even though there wasn't a direct conflict at the time, just in case. So it's something you can look at again, but that's what the discussion was at the time.
We just had a Framingham person here.
Who's handling it at the firm? Is it Chris? Has Chris been handling that?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
So do we have a formal motion to authorize David to continue the arrangements with Petrini for the time being on the basis of the hourly rate starting July 1?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of that? Aye, okay, and then a motion to authorize Chuck and me to go out and report back to the board with recommendations on town council services?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye, okay, great.
Barbara, the retention letter, there's a little typo on the travel expenses. I think you've got it flipped.
Oh, did I? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check it.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Do we have anything else on the agenda here? Staff reports. Anything?
Oh,
No.
We let Roger get out of here without the, well, I guess that's town administrator. We wanted Roger here for the Butler Street thing.
Yeah, the board appointments, are we ready to do board appointments? And where's Paul, by the way?
Paul should come back in.
There's a list of appointments that we could run through that are reappointments primarily. They've all been advertised. These people have all been spoken to and desire to be re-upped. Either that or a couple of them have expressed interest in going on as a new member, and but the positions have all been advertised.
Okay.
And what I can do is read the committee, the term and the name, and then you can vote each individual one, or I could read them all and vote the whole list, or...
Why don't you read them all, and if somebody has a hold, they can hold.
Okay.
So, Paul, Dave's going to read through the names of proposed appointments to boards and committees. And if anybody has a hold on anything, we should just hold. Say hold.
Agricultural Commission, a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Susan Tyler, and for a 3-year term, Linda Boggins, expiring 6/15/18 as well. And then for Board of Appeals, Ron Stefik to a 3-year term, expiring 6/15/18. And then one associate member, Rick Novak, to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Conservation Commission, Alex Douse to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Council on Aging, Susan Pierce to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Disability Advisory Committee, Frank Hess to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Elderly and Disabled Taxation Committee, Doug Brody to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Elder Housing Committee, Carol Carasy, the 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Energy Committee, Michael Lesser to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. And Keisha Lifton to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/18. Farm Pond Advisory Committee, Melinda O'Neill to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. Historical Commission, Ron Stefik to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. MBTA Advisory Board, Grace Shepard to a 1-year term expiring 6/15/2016. Personnel Board, Fred Abdelahad to a 2-year term expiring 6/15/2017. Nick Anastasopoulos. I had to practice that one.
Can I hold that one, because I don't know who he is? I just want to find out more about him from you.
Okay, yeah. Sherborn Arts Council, Robin Pereira to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. Southwest Area Planning Committee, Gino Carlucci to a 1-year term expiring 6/15/2016. Town Center Water Options Committee, Grace Shepard to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. Ed Rose to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. Brian Moore to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. And Roger Demler to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. Town Forest Committee, David Colleen to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. And Traffic Safety Committee, Kristen Buckler to a 3-year term expiring 6/15/2018. And Brian Clark to a 2-year term expiring 6/15/2017.
So, David, the reason I asked to hold Nick Anastopoulos was just because I don't know, is he a current member of that committee?
Can I speak on his behalf?
Well, I just want to ask the question. Is he a current member?
A reappointment.
Okay, and he's got some human resources training or
He's
experience?
a labor lawyer.
Perfect. Okay, you don't have to say any more. I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine.
He's a truly excellent guy.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I just didn't know who he was, wanted to make sure we had somebody. I want to make sure the appointments to that board are people with expertise in the subject area of that board. That's a critical board to the town, and it needs to have professional appointments who have subject matter expertise in the subject of what that board does.
Yeah, just, he's very critical to that board.
Good, perfect, excellent. I think he's doing a great job.
Move the appointments.
Can I suggest we move the appointments with the exception of Dave Colleen because there's a conflict of interest?
I have a couple conflicts.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Did you skip recycling?
No,
Yeah, that's intentionally, there's a note on that, Pat. So, Sean, what's...
Well, I mean, Brian Clark's taking my seat. I don't know if that's...
That's not a conflict, you're okay with that. We're not going to call it the Colleen seat, though.
No.
It's the people's seat.
I assume you're going to want to not have to vote on Dave Colleen, or probably can't vote. So if you want to move everybody, and then we'll do a separate vote on that one.
Perfect. With the exception of the appointment to the Town Forest Committee, I move that the appointments, as read by the, be approved.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Motion to approve David Colleen for a 3-year term to the Town Forest Safety Committee. Okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye, and 1 abstain. Sean. Okay, good. And it's...
Before you leave that,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I just say thank you to all these people who are serving the town and have come forward, and there still are vacancies, so anybody listening, we still have an opportunity for you to serve the town, so please come forward.
Great. Yeah, and
I think
thanks
it's
to
remarkable that Paul was able to fill out this list that well the other night at Beer Fest.
I was walking around with a list.
You recruited all these people at the Brew Fest.
Yeah, people were jumping over tables to get away from me. They were avoiding me like the plague.
That's great.
With my little list of jobs.
Hey, if it works, it works. That's fantastic.
Did you wait until they hit a certain level of inebriation before you approached them?
It was more effective.
So what's the water testing, David? Are you prepared to make a report on that?
Yeah, I'll just say that there was originally some concern about the water coming out of the spouts inside the CM&D building. After an initial test, there was a little more informal test, so we had the inside spigots throughout formally tested, and they're all tested fine.
Okay.
Now we're proceeding to do a test at the well, just as a double check to make sure, because I think the well has gone untested for a long time. I don't know if Sean's been involved in some of that, if you wanted to say anything on it, or...
I was a little, in that I was the one that found the vent to the tank open, and that raised my level of concern, because for anyone that doesn't know, it's either 500 or 1,000 gallon potable water tank under the parking lot that was installed when we built the building. And that's what broke, was the vent to it. So animals could have gone in there, whatever. So it's been tested. I'm still a little hesitant because they tested, not that I question the test now, but obviously they didn't find lead. They found it earlier. It happened to be a day they were street sweeping, so the point of that tank is actually so that they have water for the street sweeper, because there's nowhere else in town you can get water for a street sweeper. And that agitates that tank. So the question would be, if there is sediment in the tank that either came from the well or came from the working of building it, I don't know. Maybe that's still coming up. What was still more concerning was if it's coming from the well, which it didn't show up as they tested it. I don't know if lead precipitates down when it sits still in a tank for a week or a month. I don't know. I'll feel better knowing that the well does get tested, because it never got tested, or it didn't test positive, I think, when they drilled it. They drilled it in like 92 or 3 or whatever it was.
So we have Norfolk Ram that we've used at the landfill for testing. They're working with us on this. We also picked Carol Boyce's brain about the possibilities that there. And I also, since the facility there is supposed to be used as some sort of backup shelter, you want to try to test it as a potable water supply under the state regulations. I mean, a public water supply, I'm sorry. So that's what they'll be testing under those limits to see if it meets those limits.
Great.
If I could make one more point, I was hoping to make it while there was at least a member of the Board of Health. I'm still a little disturbed that the Board of Health not only hasn't taken any leadership role on this at all, but haven't even assisted. There was basically no response from the Board of Health when I raised the issue, and when then Ed Wagner, on basically our behalf, tried to handle the issue. They didn't, and I can assure you it's not like that for the customers in town. And I think as members of any board, we all own that building, and one, we should all care, we all have a vested interest in it, either as residents or on the board, but I would think the Board of Health should be controlling that. Yeah, it's under our budget, but there was a certificate of occupancy for that building when it was built not too long ago, and
treating it as a public water supply, yeah, there should have been an ongoing monitoring of when that thing's not being tested. That should have raised a red flag somewhere. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Okay. Certainly, when the building was, when the building permit was finalized.
Yeah,
you're not going to move into your house without a water test.
I don't think it's a public water supply.
Well, it would be if it's a shelter, is what David's saying.
It's our emergency shelter.
I thought Pine Hill School was.
Technically, Pine Hill School doesn't qualify because it doesn't have a diesel generator. It's got a natural gas generator. It can't be FEMA.
This is the first.
I know we still use it, but
I think when we were building the building, as you were active in that, it's not going to be a public water supply because you need to have 25 or more people. So it wasn't the intent to have this be a public water supply. But if somebody's designated as a shelter, that's a different story. But yeah, that designation never came before this board. I mean, who?
I don't know if it needed to, and I wasn't involved in that. But I know for a fact that the reason it's a diesel generator, we paid a lot of money to have that, is because if it's going to be a shelter, it can't be a natural gas generator. It has to be diesel. So.
And I think any town building has the potential to be have more than 25 users. That we should be up to that standard of a public water.
So the short answer though is that you're going to test the well.
Yes, and we'll get those results to you as soon as possible. And then I think I already previously reported that we did testing around the landfill, and those all came back fine. And those homeowners were notified that their results were fine.
What's the insurance binder update?
That was we went out to. We had some 3-year steady increase in the accidental death and dismemberment for police department and fire department. That's a required coverage. And we started questioning why it was going up so much, and then we went and sought another quote, and we got a very good competitive quote, and then we received, they kind of went back and forth, which and then at some point you have to pull the trigger and say, okay, enough's enough, and the generated savings, if we don't have any claims, will be around $20,000 from what we have currently in the FY16 budget. If we do have claims and meet the whole $10,000 deductible, then we would have about a $10,000 savings.
That's great.
But it was very significant savings by going out.
Well done.
And didn't your note mention that it doubled the payout?
Right, yeah. It doubled the coverage from 150,000 maximum to 300,000 maximum.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good.
It was very good.
Any selectmen reports?
Well, just under selectmen reports, Sean and I were at the Brewfest. It was very well attended. I think they estimated 650 people attended.
It was packed.
And you were there.
Yeah, it was packed.
So 3 selectmen were there, but we didn't meet at all. We were all separate.
And we didn't drink anything either.
The proceeds then go to different grants that people can apply for. So at some point, the Sherborn Business Association will announce the amount of funds available and who will be soliciting grants. And the town has received a number of grants in the past to help support some various projects, but they also help private activities of different kinds. So that's all probably going to take place in the fall.
Great.
And I think I had a good time. I think the other selectmen who were there can speak for themselves, but it looked like the time that they were having a good time. So it was a successful event.
Fantastic. Any other reports, selectmen reports?
15-second one. I went to the Sherborn Community Center. We did receive our $1 annual rent.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Thanks for collecting that.
Yeah, you're
that's
welcome.
good. Okay. So we have a next meeting of July 8th at 6 p.m. That's the Wednesday schedule we talked about for July.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was kind of hoping to take that week off. And while I won't be too far away, I'll be at an undisclosed location, but not too far. I'd rather not have a meeting on that date. It's 4 days after the 4th of July.
Well, it's just that we've been trying to get on this every other week schedule for the summer.
Yeah, I mean, the reasoning is good. It's just I want to take the week off. And I like to attend selectmen's meetings.
I thought Irene had been talking about a July 15th meeting at noon.
The 15th meeting at noon was a tentative if she's unable to get everything into you guys on the 8th.
Okay, so that's just blocked off.
Yeah, the effort was
That's
to
what
try to
that
get
email
these
was.
transfers
Yeah.
done on the 8th. That was the whole reason of having that meeting, rather than doing it at the last minute on the 15th.
But she can't get that stuff done by the 8th?
No, we're proceeding that it will be done on the 8th.
Could we get it, I mean, I know it gets off our schedule, but if we went to something like the 13th,
What is that?
which would then get us real close to the,
Yeah, Monday the...
closer to the date.
Yeah.
and, I mean, she should be done by then, right?
Somebody else used this room on the Monday, David?
I don't think so.
I have to check. I don't
No.
know. I don't know what the schedule is for all the other.
We can work it out if that's...
I'm good.
Do we just go right to the 15th and jump
There
with
was
the every other week thing?
I'm good on the 15th.
I thought there was... Somebody had a conflict on
We stick to the noon meeting on the
The 15th and 29th.
Yeah, we're not going to do a new meeting on the 15th. No. That was not something the board
What if we did a
discussed.
regular meeting on the 15th?
That's fine.
That's good. That works for me.
And then what, then we're off to the 29th? Is that the next one?
29th. I'm good on the 29th.
All right, so that makes it 3 weeks until our next meeting.
Which may mean that we'll have a chance to get a draft done in that time.
Okay.
I am out that week.
That was
But-
the other reason. That was the other reason we weren't going to meet that week.
Yeah. No, the week of the 13th.
That's what I mean.
But we'll have it all done and leave you in Diane's capable hands.
That's the meeting we'll vote everything to have the town administrator.
Administrator.
You know, the assistant town administrator do everything. Okay, so the 15th to accommodate some scheduling, and that's what we'll do. Can we also at least tentatively set the 29th, so we're not doing this the next time, too?
Yep.
Yeah.
29th's good.
Yeah, I actually have a conflict that day, but,
On the 29th?
yeah.
I can do the 27th. I
I
can do,
can't do the 27th. So, I mean,
and I can do the 30th.
Yeah, 30th works for me too.
Sean, what do you say?
Me?
Yeah?
Jump to the 30th.
You're okay on the 30th?
Huh?
I said you were okay on the 30th?
It's fine.
Okay, all right.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Eventually, I'm assuming we're going back to Thursdays, right?
Yeah, or Wednesdays, I mean, one or the other, whichever works best.
Yeah.
Oh, you had a...
Yeah, the fire thing kind of slows down in the middle of summer anyway, so I'm fine. I mean, it's more during the year, but it's fine.
I have the state medical board Thursdays. Every
30th?
No.
Oh.
30th, I'm good.
I would recommend the Wednesdays, but...
What's that?
I'd recommend Wednesdays.
Yeah, I've got a permanent problem with Wednesdays after September, though.
Okay.
That's
Right.
On each week? Is there no?
pretty much
And
every.
you know what inadvertently happened? We've been coinciding with the planning board for the past 3 meetings, I think. Which just ironically, I would have liked to have been over there, but because they were always
Yeah.
6 on Wednesdays.
You're right.
Not every week, I guess, but
No, twice a month.
Okay, so at least for the next month, we've got the 15th and the 29th. That's our July meeting.
30th.
30th.
I'm sorry, the 30th. 15th and the 30th is our July meeting dates.
And we can get rid of the 15th.
And who's providing the barbecue and all that for the 15th and the 30th?
The barbecue's on the 8th and the 29th.
Mike, do you want to...
What's that?
Typically in August, you've only scheduled one meeting.
Yeah, let's try to schedule that at our next meeting. When
Okay.
people have their plans, whatever. But should try to do something near the mid-month, I would think. Okay, good. Anything further? We have a warrant to approve here for payroll item for town administrator. Any
So moved.
second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye, okay, great.
that means we're paying him all the way through July?
Wait, he just said he was taking a day off, though.
Yeah, I know.
I missed what...
Should have brought that up for vote when he wasn't here.
I think this is to pay him for what he's
Your pay.
already
Nothing.
earned.
All right,
We need to sign the liquor license.
we need to sign the liquor license. And I need my pen back. Who's still, oh, I have it. Okay, good. I got it.
We're going to have a problem with pins here?
All right, should we pass this one down this way
Yeah,
since
yeah,
that one went
please.
the other way? Great. You guys, on that.
do
You
it,
got
please.
something that needs to be in this meeting, Elliot, or?
We're coming up to 4th of July. I've not heard one word about what the town plans are for 4th of July. Does anyone know? Can you tell me in 30 words or what?
Sorry.
Fireworks, parade, or
There is no fireworks.
no fireworks?
There is a parade. I believe it's at 1 o'clock.
Parade
There's
one?
field events.
Field events at Laurel and...
Well, we moved them last year, and you caught me a little off guard.
Okay.
You remember, we moved them to behind your house last year.
Huh?
We used the ball fields behind your house last year.
Okay, so...
I-
just
we made
curious.
my-
Thank you.
Okay, good, thanks.
Put it on the
Elliot.
website. I'll make sure it's on the
That
website.
was a good point, though. All
you.
right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, second. All in favor? Aye, adjourned. Good meeting, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Where's that here?